X aberrations in climate have become the norm. Rarely a week goes by without some meteorological phenomenon making headlines. Acrimony. X. The acrimonious dispute between the President and Vice President sent a clear signal to voters. The health of the current administration was imperiled. Amalgam. A mixture of multiple things. X. The band's music was an amalgam of hip-hop, flamenco and jazz, blending the three styles with surprising results. Ambiguous. X. The coach told his team, move towards that side of the field, because he did not point. His directions were ambiguous, and the team had no idea to which side he was referring. Ambivalent. X. Sam was ambivalent about studying for the exam because doing so ate up a lot of his time, yet he was able to improve his analytical skills. Amenable. X. Even though she did not like the outdoors, Shirley was generally amenable, and so her brother was able to persuade her to go camping. Amorphous. Shapeless. X. His study plan for the GRE was at best amorphous. He would do questions from random pages in any one of 7 test prep books. Anomalous. Not normal. X. According to those who do not believe in climate change, the extreme weather over the last 5 years is simply anomalous. Average temps should return to average, they believe. Artful. Exhibiting artistic skill. X. Picasso is generally considered the most artful member of the Cubist movement. Artful. Bernie Madoff's artful Ponzi scheme stole billions of dollars from investors and is considered the largest financial fraud in U.S. history. Auspicious. X. Despite an auspicious beginning, Mike's road trip became a series of mishaps, and he was soon stranded and penniless, leaning against his wrecked automobile. Belie. X. The smile on her face belies the pain she must feel after the death of her husband. Betray. X. With the gold medal at stake, the gymnast awaited his turn, his quivering lip betraying his intense emotions. Calumny. X. With the presidential primaries well underway, the air is thick with calumny, and the mud already waist-high. Castigate. Ex-drill sergeants are known to castigate new recruits so mercilessly that the latter often break down during their first week in training. Censure. X. After being caught in bed with a mistress, the mayor was quickly censured by the city council. Chastise. X. Though chastised for his wanton abuse of the pantry, Lawrence shrugged off his mother's harsh words and continued to plow through jars of cookies and boxes of donuts. Commensurate. X. The convicted felon's life sentence was commensurate to the heinousness of his crime. Demur. X. Wallace disliked the cold, so he demurred when his friends suggested they going skiing in the Alps. Disinterested. X. The potential juror knew the defendant and therefore could not serve on the jury, which must consist only of disinterested members. Egregious. X. The dictator's abuse of human rights was so egregious that many world leaders asked that he be tried in an international court for genocide. Innovate. X. John preferred to avoid equatorial countries. The intense sun would always leave him enervated after he'd spent the day sightseeing. Equivocal. Confusing or ambiguous. X. The findings of the study were equivocal. The two researchers had different opinions on what the results signified. Extant. The opposite of extinct. X. Despite many bookstores closing, experts predict that some form of book dealing will still be extant generations from now. Frugal. X. Monty was no miser, but was simply frugal, wisely spending the little that he earned. Galvanize. to action. X at mile 23 of his first marathon. Kyle had all but given up, until he noticed his friends and family holding a banner that read, "Go Kyle." Galvanized, he broke into a gallop, finishing the last 3 miles in less than 20 minutes. Gregarious. Often we think that great leaders are those who are gregarious, always in the middle of a large group of people. Yet, as Mahatma Gandhi and many others have shown us, leaders can also be introverted. Harangue. Dinner at Billy's was more a punishment than a reward, since anyone who sat at the dinner table would have to listen to Billy's father's interminable harangues against the government. Iconoclast. Somebody who attacks cherished beliefs or institutions. Lady Gaga, in challenging what it means to be clothed, is an iconoclast for wearing a meat dress to a prominent awards show. Impertinent. Involved. laconic. X. While Martha always swooned over the hunky, laconic types in romantic comedies, her boyfriends inevitably were very talkative and not very hunky. Maintain. X. The scientist maintained that the extinction of dinosaurs was most likely brought about by a drastic change in climate. Mercurial. X. The fact that Ella's moods were as mercurial as the weather was problematic for her relationships. It didn't help that she lived in Chicago. Parochial. X. Jasmine was sad to admit it, but her fledgling relationship with Jacob did not work out because his culinary tastes were simply too parochial. After all, she quipped on her blog, he considered Chef Boyardee ethnic food. Parsimonious. X. Katie is so parsimonious that she only buys a pair of socks if all of her other socks have holes in them. Prevaricate. X. The cynic quipped, there is not much variance in politicians, they all seem to prevaricate. Prodigal. X. Successful professional athletes who do not fall prey to prodigality seem to be the exception, most live decadent lives. Profligate. Profligate. X. Most lottery winners go from being conservative, frugal types to outright profligates who blow millions on fast cars, lavish homes, and giant yachts. Qualify. To be legally competent or capable. X. If James had made more than $50,000 last year, then he wouldn't have qualified for the low-income scholarship. Restive. Restless. X. The crowd grew restive as the comedian's opening jokes fell flat. Undermine. To weaken. X. The student undermined the teacher's authority by questioning the teacher's judgment on numerous occasions. Upbraid. X. Bob took a risk walking into the student's barber shop. In the end he had to upbraid the apparently drunk barber for giving him an uneven bowl cut. Venality. X. Even some of the most sacrosanct sporting events are not immune to venality, as many of the officials have received substantial bribes to make biased calls. Venerate. X. The professor, despite his soporific lectures, was venerated among his colleagues, publishing more papers yearly than all of his peers combined. Voracious. X. While we elect our leaders in the hope that every word they speak will be veracious, history has shown that such a hope is naive. Vindicate. X. Even 7 Tour de France wins cannot vindicate Lance Armstrong in the eyes of the public. That the athlete used performance-enhancing drugs invalidates all those wins. Wanting. Lacking. X. She did not think her vocabulary was wanting, yet there were so many words that inevitably she found a few she didn't know. Aesthete. One who professes great sensitivity to the beauty of art and nature. X. A true aesthete. Marty would spend hours at the Guggenheim Museum, staring at the same Picasso. Aesthetic. X. The director, not known for his aesthetic sensibilities, decided not to use costumes at all, and put on the play in everyday clothing. Aesthetic. A set of principles underlying and guiding the work of a particular artist or artistic movement. X. The artist operated according to a peculiar aesthetic, not considering any photograph to be worth publishing unless it contained a marine mammal. Apathetic. X. Mr. Thompson was so talented at teaching math that even normally apathetic students took interest. Audacious. X. As all of the other campers cowered in their tents, Bill, armed only with a flashlight, audaciously tracked down the bear that had raided their food. Banal. X. The professor used such banal expression that many students in the class either fell asleep from boredom or stayed awake to complete his sentences and humor friends. banality. X. Herbert regarded the minister's remark as a mere banality until Sharon pointed out profound implications to the seemingly obvious words. Bucolic. X. The noble families of England once owned vast expanses of beautiful, bucolic land. Chortor. X. Walking past the bar, I could hear happy, chortling people and the blast of horns from a jazz band. Concede. X. I concede, you win. Conspicuous. Ex-American basketball players are always conspicuous when they go abroad. Not only are they American, but some are over 7 feet tall. Cryptic. Since Sarah did not want her husband to guess the Christmas present she had bought him, she only answered cryptically when he would ask her questions about it. Culminate. Beethoven's musical genius culminated in the Ninth Symphony, which many consider his greatest work. Culpability. Since John had left his banana peel at the top of the stairwell, he accepted culpability for Martha's broken leg. Decorous. Sally's parties are decorous affairs, and instead of the usual beer and music, there is tea and intellectual conversation. Deferential. If you ever have the chance to meet the president, stand up straight and be deferential. Dictatorial. The coach was dictatorial in his approach. No players could ever argue or question his approach. Didactic. Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich is a didactic novel, instructing the reader on how to live a good life. Diffident. As a young girl she was diffident and reserved, but now as an adult she is confident and assertive. Dogmatic. Brian is dogmatic in his belief that the Earth is flat, claiming that all pictures of a spherical Earth are computer-generated. Engender. The restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles were so severe that they engendered deep hatred and resentment in the German people. Entrenched. By the time we reach 60 years old, most of our habits are so entrenched that it is difficult for us to change. Eschew. Politicians are the masters of eschewing morals. Academics are the masters of eschewing clarity. Exacerbate. Make worse. Her sleeplessness exacerbated her cold. When she woke up the next day, her sinuses were completely blocked. Fortuitous. While the real objects are vastly different sizes in space, the sun and the moon seem to have the same fortuitous size in the sky. Frivolous. Not serious in content or attitude or behavior. Compared to Juliet's passionate concern for human rights, Jake's non-stop concern about football seems somewhat frivolous. Gainsay. I can't gainsay a single piece of evidence James has presented, but I still don't trust his conclusion. Gore. Even though Cully was only recently hired, she had the gall to question her boss's judgment in front of the office. Gore. In an act of gore, Leah sent compromising photos of her ex-boyfriend to all his co-workers and professional contacts. Germain. The professor wanted to tell the jury in detail about his new book, but the lawyer said it wasn't germane to the charges in the cases. Glut. The internet offers such a glut of news-related stories that many find it difficult to know which story to read first. Glut. In the middle of economic crises, hiring managers find their inboxes glutted with resumes. Gossamer. X. The gossamer wings of a butterfly, which allow it to fly, are also a curse, so delicate that they are often damaged. Impudent. Improperly forward or bold. X. In an impudent move, the defendant spoke out of order to say terribly insulting things to the judge. Incisive. X. The lawyer had an incisive mind, able in a flash to dissect a hopelessly tangled issue and isolate the essential laws at play. Inexorable. X. The rise of the computer was an inexorable shift in technology and culture. Lambast. X. Showing no patience, the manager utterly lambasted the sales team that lost the big account. Mawkish. X. The film was incredibly mawkish, introducing highly likable characters only to have them succumb to devastating illnesses by the end of the movie. Meticulous. X. The Japanese noodle maker was meticulous in making his noodles and would never let another person take over the task. Mitigate. X. I can only spend so much time mitigating your disagreements with your wife, and at certain point, you need to do it on your own. Obscure. X. On the Smith's drive through the Grand Canyon, Mr. Smith's big head obscured much of Mrs. Robinson's view, so that she only saw momentary patches of red rock. Perfidy. X. The lowest circles in Dante's Inferno were for those who had practiced perfidy, and among these, the very lowest was for those, such as Judas, who had been treacherous to one of their benefactors. Platitude. X. The professor argued that many statements regarded as wise in previous times, such as the Golden Rule, are now regarded as mere platitudes. Preclude. X. The manager specified that all other gates be locked to preclude the possibility of persons without tickets entering the arena undetected. Predilection. X. Monty had a predilection for the fine things in life: Cuban cigars, $200 bottles of wine, and trips to the French Riviera. Prescience. X. Baxter's warnings about investing in technology stocks seemed like an act of prescience after the whole market declined significantly. Querulous. X. The querulous old woman was beginning to wear down even the happier members of the staff with her ceaseless complaining. Recondite. X. I found Ulysses recondite and never finished the book, waiting instead to read it with someone else so we could penetrate its meaning together. Reticent. Reluctant to draw attention to yourself, temperamentally disinclined to talk. X. When asked about her father, Helen lost her outward enthusiasm and became rather reticent. Rustic. X. The vacation cabin had no electricity and no indoor plumbing, but despite these inconveniences, Nigel adored its rustic charm. Superfluous. X. How can we hope to stay open if we don't eliminate all superfluous spending, like catered meetings and free acupuncture Tuesday? Superfluous. More than is needed, desired, or required. X. Everything in this closet is superfluous and can be given to charity. Torpor. X. After work, I was expecting my colleagues to be enthusiastic about the outing, but I found them in a state of complete torpor. Vociferous. X. In giving Marcia a particular vociferous response, Paul caused people at every other table in the restaurant to turn around and look at them angrily. Volubility. The quality of talking or writing easily and continuously. X. The professor's volubility knows no bounds. He could talk through a hurricane and elaborate a point from one St. Patrick's Day to the next. Blatant. X. Allen was often punished in school for blatantly disrespecting teachers. Abstain. choose not to consume or take part in. X considered a health nut. Jessica abstained from anything containing sugar, even chocolate. Ameliorate. X 3 cups of tea tells the story of a Western man who hopes to ameliorate poverty and the lack of education in Afghanistan. Apathy. X widespread apathy among voters led to a very small turnout on election day. Ascetic. X's ascetic life is the main reason he inspired so many followers, especially since he gave up wealth and power to live in poverty. Ascetic. One who practices great self-denial. X historically, ascetics like Gandhi are often considered wise men partially because of their restraint. Avaricious. X since avaricious desire is similar to gluttony or lust, sins of excess, it was listed as one of the 7 deadly sins by the Catholic Church. Belligerent. X Tom said that he was arguing the matter purely for philosophical reasons, but his belligerent tone indicated an underlying anger about the issue. Circumvent. X one way of circumventing the GRE is to apply to a grad school that does not require GRE scores. Contrive. X despite a low GPA, he contrived to get into college, going so far as to write his own glowing letters of recommendation. Delineate. X after a brief summary of proper swimming technique, the coach delineated the specifics of each stroke, spending 30 minutes alone on the backstroke. Denote. Even if the text is not visible, the red octagon denotes stop to all motorists in America. Derive. X many words in the English language are derived from Latin, including the word derive. Derivative. /X because the movies were utterly derivative of other popular movies, they did well at the box office. Disaffected. X after watching his superior take rations from the solidars, he quickly became disaffected and rebelled. Eclectic. X Joey was known for his eclectic tastes in music, one moment dancing to disco, the next air conducting along to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Elucidate. X YouTube is a great place to learn just about anything. An expert elucidates finer points so that even a complete novice can learn. Eminent. X Shakespeare is an eminent author in the English language, but I find his writing uninteresting and melodramatic. Ephemeral. X the lifespan of a mayfly is ephemeral, lasting from a few hours to a couple of days. Fallacious. X the widespread belief that Eskimos have 40 different words for snow is fallacious, based on one false report. Forlorn. X after her third pet dog died, Marcia was simply forlorn. This time even the possibility of buying a new dog no longer held any joy. Frustrate. X I thought I would finish writing the paper by lunchtime, but a number of urgent interruptions served to frustrate my plan. Guileless. X at first I thought my niece was guileless, but I then found myself buying her ice cream every time we passed a shop. Haughty. X the haughty manager didn't believe that any of his subordinates could ever have an insight as brilliant his own. Heretic. A person who holds unorthodox opinions in any field. X though everybody at the gym told Mikey to do cardio before weights, Mikey was a heretic and always did the reverse. Immutable. X taxes are one of the immutable laws of the land, so there is no use arguing about paying them. Incongruous. X the vast economic inequality of modern society is incongruous with America's ideals. Insidious. X pluck is insidious, we cannot see it, but each day it eats away at our enamel, causing cavities and other dental problems. Itinerant. X doctors used to be itinerant, traveling between patients' homes. Jingoism. X North Korea maintains intense control over its population through a combination of jingoism and cult of personality. Jubilant. X my hard work paid off, and I was jubilant to receive a perfect score on the GRE. Juxtapose. X the meaning of her paintings comes from a classical style which juxtaposes modern themes. Languid. X as the sun beat down and the temperature climbed higher, we spent a languid week lying around the house. Magnanimous. X he was a great sportsman, in defeat he was complimentary and in victory he was magnanimous. Mollify. X in the morning, Harriet was unable to mollify Harry if he happened to become angry unless he had his cup of coffee. Negligible. X the GRE tests cumulative knowledge, so if you cram the night before it is, at best, likely to only have a negligible impact on your score. Panache. Distinctive and stylish elegance. X Jim, with his typical panache, came to the wedding reception with a top hat, a cane, and a long cape covered in sequins. Precocious. Characterized by or characteristic of exceptionally early development or maturity. X though only 7 years old, she was a precocious chess prodigy, able to beat players twice her age. Quotidian. X Phil gets so involved thinking about Aristotle's arguments that he totally forgets quotidian concerns such as exercising and eating regularly. Refractory. X used to studious high school students. Martha was unprepared for the refractory kindergarteners who neither sat still nor listened to a single word she said. Rudimentary. X I would love to be able to present a fully polished proposal to the board, but right now our plans for the product are still in the most rudimentary stages. Spurious. X when listening to a politician speak, it is hard to distinguish the spurious claims from the authentic ones. Staunch. X no longer a staunch supporter of the movement. Todd now will openly question whether its goals are worthwhile. Subsume. Contain or include. X the rogue wave quickly subsumed the pier and boardwalk, destroying everything in its path. Supplant. X for many, a cell phone has supplanted a traditional phone. In fact, most 20-somethings don't even have a traditional phone anymore. Tantamount. X in many situations, remaining silent is tantamount to admitting guilt, so speak to prove your innocence. Tenacious. Stubbornly unyielding. X even the most tenacious advocates for gun ownership must admit is some of the dangers that firearms present. Travesty. X what one expected to be an intelligent, nuanced historical documentary turned out to be a poorly produced travesty of the form. Treacherous. X even though Jesse James was an outlaw, his killer, Robert Ford, is remembered more for his treacherous actions than for eliminating a criminal and murder. Unequivocal. X the president's first statement on the subject was vague and open to competing interpretations, so when he spoke to Congress about the same subject later, he was careful to make his position completely unequivocal. Vehement. X while the other employees responded to the bad news in a measured way, Andrew responded in a vehement manner, tipping over his desk and shouting at the top of his lungs. Vilify. Todd was noble after the divorce, choosing to say only complimentary things about Barbara, but Barbara did not hesitate to vilify Todd. Implacable. Incapable of making less angry or hostile X win or lose, the coach was always implacable, never giving the athletes an easy practice or a break. Aberrant. When the financial director started screaming and throwing food at his co-workers, the police had to come in to deal with his aberrant behavior. Abstruse. Physics textbooks can seem so abstruse to the uninitiated that readers feel as though they are looking at hieroglyphics. Acerbic. Most movie critics are acerbic towards summer blockbusters, often referring to them as garbage. Adamant. Civil rights icon Rosa Parks will forever be remembered for adamantly refusing to give up her seat on a public bus, even after the bus driver insisted she remained rooted in place. Admonitory. At the assembly, the high school vice principal gave the students an admonitory speech, warning them of the many risks and dangers of prom night. Apocryphal. The web is notorious for sandwiching apocryphal stories between actual news. Blatant. Alan was often punished in school for blatantly disrespecting teachers. Bumbling. Within a week of starting, the bumbling new waiter was unceremoniously fired. Burgeon. China's housing market is burgeoning, but some predict that the growth is merely a bubble and will burst much like the US real estate bubble of 2008. Confound. Though Harry loved numbers, he found calculus confounding. Construe. The author's inability to take a side on the issue was construed by both his opponents and supporters as a sign of weakness. Contingent. A gathering of persons representative of some larger group. A small contingent of those loyal to the king have gathered around the castle to defend it. Copious. In midsummer, there are copious popiscal stands at the beach. In the winter, there are none. Decorum. You will obey the rules of decorum for this courtroom or spend the night in a jail cell, said the judge to the prosecutor. Denigrate. Count Rumford denigrated the new theory of heat, demonstrating that it was wholly inadequate to explain the observations. Discreet. What was once known as Czechoslovakia has since split into two discrete, independent nations. Eradicate. I tried eradicating the mosquitoes in my apartment with a rolled-up newspaper, but there were too many of them. Espouse. As a college student, Charlie espoused Marxism, growing his beard out and railing against the evils of the free market. Exacting. Though his childhood piano teacher was so exacting, Max is thankful now, as a professional pianist. Exalt. The teenagers exalted the rock star, covering their bedrooms with posters of him. Exonerate. The document clearly indicated that Nick was out of the state at the time of the crime, and so served to exonerate him of any charges. Expound. The CEO refused to expound on the decision to merge our department with another one, and so I quit. Forthcoming. Available when required or as promised. The president announced that the senators were about to reach a compromise, and that he was eager to read the forthcoming details of the bill. Forthcoming. At ease in talking to others. As a husband, Larry was not forthcoming. If Jill didn't demand to know details, Larry would never share them with her. Hackneyed. Gerald rolled her eyes when she heard the lecturer's hackneyed advice to be true to yourself. Iconoclastic. Defying tradition or convention. Jackson Pollock was an iconoclastic artist, totally breaking with tradition by splashing paint on a blank canvas. Idiosyncrasy. Peggy's numerous idiosyncrasies include wearing mismatched shoes, laughing loudly to herself, and owning a pet aardvark. Ignoble. In the 1920s, the World Series was rigged, an ignoble act which baseball took decades to recover from. Implausible. The teacher found it implausible that the student was late to school because he had been kidnapped by outlaws on horseback. Incorrigible. Tom Sawyer seems like an incorrigible youth until Huck Finn enters the novel. Even Sawyer can't match his fierce individual spirit. Indifference. In an effort to fight indifference, the president of the college introduced a new, stricter grading system. Ingratiate. Even though Tom didn't like his new boss, he decided to ingratiate himself to her in order to advance his career. Intransigent. Despite many calls for mercy, the judge remained intransigent, citing strict legal precedents. Largesse. Uncle Frank was known for his largesse, so his nephew was sad when he did not receive a present for his birthday. Laudable. To say that Gandhi's actions were laudable is the greatest understatement. He overthrew an empire without violence. Myopic. The company ultimately went out of business because the myopic managers couldn't predict the changes in their industry. Opaque. The meaning of the professor's new research was opaque to most people, so no one asked any questions. Ostentatious. Matt wanted to buy stone lions for front of the house, but Cynthia convinced him that such a display would be too ostentatious for a modest house in an unassuming neighborhood. Pedantic. Marked by a narrow focus on or display of learning, especially its trivial aspects. Professor Thompson was regarded as an expert in his field, but his lectures were utterly pedantic, focused on rigorous details of the most trivial conventions in the field. Petulant. When Ed first met Ruth, he didn't realize she was so petulant, but now that they are 3 months into their relationship, Ed feels a day doesn't go by in which she isn't whining about some minor issue. Pragmatic. Rather than make a philosophical appeal to the congressman, the speaker decided to take a far more pragmatic approach, making small side deals that would add votes to his bill. Provincial. Maggie's enthusiasm about her high school team seemed provincial to her college classmates, all of whom were following a nationally ranked college team. Pundit. Someone who has been admitted to membership in a scholarly field. Steven Pinker's credentials are unquestioned as a pundit. He has taught at MIT and Stanford, teaches at Harvard, and has published a number of influential books on cognition, language, and psychology. Reconcile. Compatible with Peggy was unable to reconcile her kind friend Jane with the cruel and merciless character Jane played on television. Refute. Proved to be false or incorrect. No one could refute his theories or propositions, and that is why he was esteemed by all his colleagues in the philosophy department. Soporific. Although the professor is brilliant, his bland monotone gives his lectures a soporific effect. Temperance. Wells wasn't known for his temperance. He usually ate enough for 2 and drank enough for 3. Tortuous. X because the logic behind McMahon's side of the debate was so tortuous, his audience came out either completely confused or, worse, feeling they'd been tricked. Underscore. Give extra weight to X. While the hiking instructor agreed that carrying a first aid kit could be a good idea under certain circumstances, he underscored the importance of carrying enough water. Unscrupulous. Without scruples or principles, X in the courtroom, the lawyer was unscrupulous, using every manner of deceit and manipulation to secure a victory for himself. Accolade. Jean-Paul Sartre was not a fan of accolades, and as such, he refused to accept the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1964. Admonish. Before the concert began, security personnel admonished the crowd not to come up on stage during the performance. Antithetical. His a deep emotional involvement with these ideas is, in fact, antithetical to the disattachment Buddhism preaches. Arbitrary. One of the arbitrary decrees in place during the emperor's rule is that all citizens pay him weekly homage at his palace. Arcane. Most college fraternities are known for arcane rituals that those hoping to join the fraternity must learn. Audacity. She surprised her colleagues by having the audacity to publicly criticize the findings of an distinguished scientist. Austere. His lifestyle of revelry and luxurious excess could hardly be called austere. Austere. His late Soviet architecture, although remaining largely austere, moved into experimental territory that employed previously unused shapes and structures. Brazen. Their large donations to the local police department gave the drug cartel the brazen confidence to do their business out in the open. Circumscribe. Their tour of South America was circumscribed so that they saw only popular destinations and avoided the dangerous parts of cities. Constituent. The mayor's constituents are no longer happy with her performance and plan to vote for another candidate in the upcoming election. Constituent. The constituents of the metal alloy are nickel, copper, and tin. Dilettante. Fred has no formal medical training. While he likes to claim authority on medical issues, he is little more than a dilettante. Ferment. After having his pay cut, Phil spread vicious rumors about his boss, hoping to foment a general feeling of discontent. Garrulous. Lynn was garrulous. Once, she had a 15-minute conversation with a stranger before she realized the woman didn't speak English. Gauche. Sylvester says the most gauche things, such as telling a girl he liked that she was much prettier when she wore makeup. Haphazard. Many golf courses are designed with great care, but the greens on the county golf course seem entirely haphazard. Hegemony. Until the Spanish Armada was defeated in 1587, Spain had hegemony over the seas, controlling waters stretching as far as the Americas. Inimical. Hostile. Venus, with a surface temperature that would turn rubber to liquid, is inimical to any form of life. Inscrutable. His speech was so dense and confusing that many in the audience found it inscrutable. Insolent. Lillian could not help herself from being insolent, commenting that the Queen's shoes were showing too much toe. Intrepid. Captain Ahab was an intrepid captain whose reckless and fearless style ultimately leads to his downfall. Inveterate. He is an inveterate smoker and has told his family and friends that there is no way he will ever quit. Irrevocable. X. Once you enter your plea to the court, it is irrevocable, so think carefully about what you will say. Lionize. Assign great social importance to X. Students in the U.S. learn to lionize Jefferson, Franklin, and Washington because they are the founding fathers of the nation. Munificent. X. Uncle Charlie was known for his munificence, giving all 7 of his nephews lavish Christmas presents each year. Myriad. X. There are a myriad of internet sites hawking pills that claim to boost energy for hours on end. Obscure. X. Many of the biggest movie stars were once obscure actors who got only bit roles in long-forgotten films. Obsequious. X. The obsequious waiter did not give the couple a moment's peace all through the meal, constantly returning to their table to refill their water glasses and to tell them what a handsome pair they made. Ostracize. X. Later in his life, Leo Tolstoy was ostracized from the Russian Orthodox Church for his writings that contradicted church doctrine. Pedestrian. X. While Nan was always engaged in philosophical speculation, her brother was occupied with far more pedestrian concerns: how to earn a salary and run a household. Pernicious. X. The most successful viruses are pernicious. An infected person may feel perfectly healthy for several months while incubating and spreading the virus. Poignant. X. After the Montagues and Capulets discover the dead bodies of Romeo and Juliet in the play's most poignant moment, the 2 grief-stricken families agree to end their feud once and for all. Precipitous. A sharp rise-drop, done with very great haste and without due deliberation. X. He was expecting a precipitous rise in the value of a hot tech stock, so he was disappointed when it only inched up $1 or $2 each day. Prodigious. X. After the relatively small home run totals in the dead ball era, Babe Ruth's home run totals were truly prodigious. Every year, he set a new all-time record. Prolific. Intellectually productive. X. Schubert was the most prolific composer, producing hundreds of hours of music before he died at the age of 31. Propitious. X. The child's heartbeat is still weak, but I am seeing many propitious signs and I think that she may be healing. Ravenous. X. John didn't teach much at all during the week he had the flu, so now that he is regaining his health, it's not surprising that he has a ravenous appetite. Repudiate. X. Many in the public believed the rumors of a UFO crash outside town, so the chief of police did everything he could to repudiate the rumors. Rescind. X. The man's driver's license was rescinded after his 10th car accident, which meant he would never be allowed to legally drive again. Resurgent. X. The team sank to 4th place in June, but is now resurgent and about to win the division. Reverent. X. The professor could speak objectively about the other composers, but he always lectured about Brahms with a particularly reverent air, unable to offer a single criticism of his compositions. Sanction. X. The authorities have sanctioned the use of the Wilderness Reserve for public use. Many expect to see hikers and campers enjoying the park in the coming months. Scrupulous. X. Because of his scrupulous nature, Mary put him in charge of numbering and cataloguing the entire collection of rare stamps. Sporadic. X. The signals were at first sporadic, but now we detect a clear, consistent pattern of electromagnetic radiation emitting from deep space. Subversive. X. The ruling political party has begun a campaign to shut down subversive websites that it deems as a threat to national safety. Sycophant. The CEO was unaware of the damage and consequences of his choices, largely because he surrounded himself with sycophants who would never dare criticize him. Taciturn. While the CEO enthusiastically shares his plans and agenda with all who will listen, the CFO is far more taciturn, rarely revealing his perspective. Tempered. Moderated in effect. The wide-eyed optimism of her youth was now tempered after she had worked many years in the criminal justice system. Tractable. Readily reacting to suggestions and influences, easily managed. Compared to middle school students who have an untamed wildness about them, high school students are somewhat more tractable. Trite. Many style guides recommend not using idioms in writing because these trite expressions are uninteresting and show a lack of imagination on the part of the writer. Vacillate. Some students vacillate between schools when deciding which to attend, while others focus only on one school. Winsome. She was winsome by nature, and many people were drawn to this free and playful spirit. Anomaly. After finding an anomaly in the data, she knew that she would have to conduct her experiment again. Antipathy. Maria had an antipathy for tour groups, often bolting to the other side of the museum as soon as she saw a chaperone leading a group of wide-eyed tourists. Appease. Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister during WWII, tried to appease Hitler and in doing so sent a clear message: you can walk all over us. Arduous. Demanding considerable mental effort and skill, testing powers of endurance. In order to deal with the arduous cross-country journey, truck drivers often survive on a string of caffeinated drinks, staying awake for up to 30 hours at a time. Askance. The old couple looked askance on the teenagers seated next to them, whispering to each other they've got rings through their noses and purple hair. Bolster. The case for the suspect's innocence was bolstered considerably by the fact that neither fingerprints nor DNA were found at the scene. Capricious. Nearly every month our capricious CEO had a new plan to turn the company around, and none of them worked because we never gave them the time they needed to succeed. Contrition. Those who show contrition during their prison terms, especially when under review by a parole board, often get shortened sentences. Craven. Though the man could have at least alerted the police, he crouched cravenly in the corner as the old woman was mugged. Deleterious. Harmful to living things. The BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico was deleterious to the fishing industry in the southern states. Dilatory. Lawyers use dilatory tactics so that it takes years before the case is actually decided. Dispassionate. A good scientist should be dispassionate, focusing purely on what the evidence says, without personal attachment. Disseminate. Before the effects of anesthesia were disseminated, patients had to experience the full pain of a surgery. Duress. The witness said he signed the contract under duress and argued that the court should cancel the agreement. Economical. Journalists favor an economical style of writing, in which no unnecessary words are used and every sentence is as short as possible. Edifying. Enlightening or uplifting so as to encourage intellectual or moral improvement. I recently read an article in the Times about whether good literature is edifying or not. Specifically, does reading more make a person more moral? Efficacious. Since Maggie's cough syrup, which had expired 5 years back, was no longer efficacious, she coughed through the night. Illicit. To evoke, call forth X. Just smiling, even if you are depressed, can elicit feelings of pleasure and happiness. Erudite. X. Before the internet, the library was typically where you would find erudite readers. Esoteric. X. Map collecting is an esoteric hobby to most, but to geography geeks it is a highly enjoyable pastime. Fastidious. X. Whitney is fastidious about her shoes, arranging them on a shelf in a specific order, each pair evenly spaced. Flux. X. Ever since Elvira resigned as the head of marketing, everything about our sales strategy has been in a state of flux. Furtive. X. While at work, George and his boss Regina felt the need to be as furtive as possible about their romantic relationship. Harried. X. With a team of new hires to train, Martha was constantly harried with little questions and could not focus on her projects. Ignominious. Deserving or bringing disgrace or shame. X. Since the politician preached ethics and morality, his texting of revealing photographs was ignominious, bringing shame on both himself and his party. Impartial. Adjective. X. The judge was not impartial since he had been bribed by the witness's family. Imprudent. X. Hitler, like Napoleon, made the imprudent move of invading Russia in winter, suffering even more casualties than Napoleon had. Indecorous. X. Eating with elbows on the table is considered indecorous in refined circles. Jovial. X. The political candidate and his supporters were jovial once it was clear that she had won. Maladroit. X. As a child she was quite maladroit, but as an adult she has become an adept dancer. Maverick. Ex-Officer Kelly was a maverick, rarely following police protocols or adopting the conventions for speech common among his fellow officers. Mendacity. X. I can forgive her for her mendacity, but only because she is a child and is seeing what she can get away with. Misconstrue. X. The politician never trusted journalists because he thought that they misconstrue his words and misrepresent his positions. Mundane. Repetitive and boring, not spiritual. X. Nancy found doing dishes a thoroughly mundane task, although Peter found a kind of zen pleasure in the chore. Mundane. Relating to the ordinary world. X. Though we think of the Pope as someone always dealing in holy matters, he is also concerned with mundane events, such as deciding when to set his alarm each morning. Nonplussed. X. Shirley was totally nonplussed when the angry motorist cut her off and then stuck his finger out the window. Nuance. Slash, a subtle difference in meaning or opinion or attitude. X. Because of the nuances involved in this case, I hired an outside consultant to advise us and help. Opulence. Ex-Russian oligarchs are famous for their opulence, living in fancy homes and dining on expensive caviar. Pejorative. Expressing disapproval. X. Most psychologists object to the pejorative term shrink, believing that they expand the human mind, not limit it. Placate. X. I was able to placate the angry mob of students by promising to bring cookies on Monday. Polemic. X. The professor launched into a polemic, claiming that Freudian theory was a pack of lies that absolutely destroyed European literary theory. Posit. X. Initially, Einstein posited a repulsive force to balance gravity, but then rejected that idea as a blunder. Rebuke. The police chief rebuked the two officers whose irresponsible decisions almost led to the deaths of 7 innocent bystanders. Reproach. At first, Sarah was going to yell at the boy, but she didn't want to reproach him for telling the truth about the situation. Specious. Almost every image on TV is specious and not to be trusted. Stringent. Most of the students dislike the teacher because of his stringent homework policy, but many students would later thank him for demanding so much from them. Sullen. Herbert took board games too seriously, often appearing sullen after losing. Timorous. Since this was her first time debating on stage and before an audience, Dee's voice was timorous and quiet for the first 10 minutes. Truncate. The soccer game was truncated when the monsoon rain began to fall. Acme. The highest point of achievement. The new Cessna airplanes will be the acme of comfort, offering reclining seats and ample legroom. Affable. Likeable, easy to talk to. For all his surface affability, Marco was remarkably glum when he wasn't around other people. Affluent. Wealthy. The center of the city had sadly become a pit of penury, while, only 5 miles away, multi-million-dollar homes spoke of affluence. Amiable. Friendly. Amy's name was very apt. She was so amiable that she was twice voted class president. Bleak. Unremitting. Overcast skies tend to lead people to create bleak literature and lugubrious music. Candid. Frank. Greater than candidly, straightforward. A straightforward and honest look at something. Even with a perfect stranger, Charles was always candid and would rarely hold anything back. Censor. 1. To examine and remove objectionable material. 2. An official who censor material. Every fall, high school English teachers are inundated by requests to censor their curriculum by removing The Catcher in the Rye and Scarlet Letter from their reading lists. Demean. To insult, to cause someone to lose dignity or respect. At first the soccer players bantered back and forth, but as soon as one of the players became demeaning, calling the other's mother a water buffalo, the ref whipped out a red card. Demure. To be modest and shy. The portrait of her in a simple white blouse was sweet and demure. Diabolical. To be extremely wicked like the devil. The conspirators, willing to dispatch anyone who stood in their way, hatched a diabolical plan to take over the city. Dog. To pursue relentlessly. Throughout his life, he was dogged by insecurities that inhibited personal growth. Dupe. To trick or swindle. Once again a get-rich-fast instant scheme had duped Harold into submitting a $5,000 check to a sham operation. Embroiled. These days we are never short of a DC politician embroiled in scandal, a welcome phenomenon for those who, having barely finished feasting on the sordid details of one imbroglio, can sink their teeth into a fresh one. He erred in thinking that indigent and indignant were synonyms. Erratic. Unpredictable, strange and unconventional. It came as no surprise to pundits that the president's attempt at re-election floundered. Even during his term, support for his policies was erratic, with an approval rating jumping anywhere from 30 to 60%. Indict. The bank robber was indicted on several major charges, including possession of a firearm. Indigenous. Originating in a certain area. The plants and animals indigenous to Australia are notably different from those indigenous to the US. One look at a duckbill platypus and you know you're not dealing with an opossum. Indignant. X. When the cyclist swerved into traffic, it forced the driver to brake and elicited an indignant shout of "Hey, punk, watch where you're going." Insolvent. Bankrupt. X. With credit card bills skyrocketing, a shockingly large number of Americans are truly insolvent. Inundate. /X. The newsroom was inundated with false reports that only made it more difficult for the newscasters to provide an objective account of the bank robbery. Macabre. X. Edgar Allan Poe was considered the master of the macabre. His stories vividly describe the moment leading up to, and often those moments after, a grisly death. Mesmerize. X. The plot and the characters were so well developed that many viewers were mesmerized, unable to move their eyes from the screen for even a single second. Miser. X. Monty was no miser, but was simply frugal, wisely spending the little that he earned. Peruse. X. Instead of perusing important documents, people all too often rush to the bottom of the page and plaster their signatures at the bottom. Pine. X. Standing forlornly by the window, she pined for her lost love. Yearn. Pinnacle. The highest point. X. At its pinnacle, the Roman Empire extended across most of the landmass of Eurasia, a feat not paralleled to the rise of the British Empire in the 18th and 19th century. Profuse. Plentiful, pouring out in abundance. X. During mile 20 of the Hawaii Marathon, Dwayne was sweating so profusely that he stopped to take off his shirt and ran the remaining 6 miles wearing nothing more than skimpy shorts. Profusion. The property of being extremely abundant. X. When Maria reported that she had been visited by Jesus Christ and had proof, a profusion of reporters and journalists descended on the town. Remiss. X. Remiss in his duty to keep the school functioning efficiently. The principal was relieved of his position after only 3 months. Reprobate. / A person who is disapproved of. X. Those old reprobates drinking all day down by the river, they are not going to amount to much. Retiring. X. Nelson was always the first to leave soirees rather than mill about with fashionable folk. He was retiring and preferred the solitude of his garret. Screed. / An abusive rant. X. Joey had difficulty hanging out with his former best friend Perry, who, during his entire cup of coffee, enumerated all of the government's deficiencies, only to break ranks and launch into some screed against big business. Serendipity. X. The invention of the 3M post-it note was serendipitous because the scientist who had come up with the idea was looking for a strong adhesive. The weak adhesive he came up with was perfect for holding a piece of paper in place but made it very easy for sew. Slapdash. /X. The office building had been constructed in a slapdash manner, so it did not surprise officials when, during a small earthquake, a large crack emerged on the foresection 8 of the building. Spendthrift. /X. Taking weekly trips to Vegas, Megan a spendthrift whose excesses eventually caught up to her. Stipend. /X. He was hoping for a monthly allowance loan from the government, but after no such stipend was forthcoming he realized he would have to seek other means of paying for his college tuition. Summit. The peak or highest point. X. After hiking for 2 days, the climbers finally reached the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. Telling. X. Her unbecoming dress was very telling when it came to her sense of fashion. Telltale. X. The many telltale signs of chronic smoking include yellow teeth and a persistent hacking cough. Tender. X. The government was loath to tender more money in the fear that it might set off inflation. This word has other definitions, but this is the most important one for the GRE. Thoroughgoing. Very thorough. Complete. X. As a thoroughgoing bibliophile, one who had turned his house into a veritable library, he shocked his friends when he bought a Kindle. Thrifty. X. He was economical, spending his money thriftily and on items considered essential. Tirade. /X. In terms of political change, a tirade oftentimes does little more than make the person speaking red in the face. Underwrite. To support financially. X. The latest symphony broadcast was made possible with underwriting from the Carnegie Endowment. Unnerve. Unnerve. To make nervous or upset. X. At one time unnerved by math problems, she began avidly magooshing and soon became adept at even combinations and permutations questions. Variance. X. The cynic quipped, there is not much variance in politicians, they all seem to prevaricate. Vindictive. X. Though the other girl had only lightly poked fun of Vanessa's choice in attire, Vanessa was so vindictive that she waited for an entire semester to get the perfect revenge. Voracious. X. Stephen was a voracious reader, sometimes finishing 2 novels in the same day. Zenith. The highest point. Culmination. X. At the zenith of his artistic career, Elvis was outselling any other artist on the charts. Apex, summit, pinnacle, culmination. Hound. To pursue relentlessly. X. Throughout his life, he was dogged by insecurities that inhibited personal growth. Above board. X. The mayor, despite his avuncular face plastered about the city, was hardly above board. Some concluded that it was his ingratiating smile that allowed him to engage in corrupt behavior and get away with it. A milk. X. Wherever the bowl haircut teen idol went, his legions of screaming fans ran through the streets amok, hoping for a glance at his boyish face. Animosity. X. The governor's animosity toward his rival was only inflamed when the latter spread false lies regarding the governor's first term. Apex. The highest point. X. The Ivy League is considered the apex of the secondary education system. Avarice. X. The Spanish conquistadors were known for their avarice, plundering Incan land and stealing Incan gold. Badger. X. Badgered by his parents to find a job, the 30-year-old loafer instead joined a gang of itinerant musicians. Beatific. X. Often we imagine all monks to wear the beatific smile of the Buddha, but, like any of us, a monk can have a bad day and not look very happy. Becoming. X. Her dress was becoming and made her look even more beautiful. Bellicose. X. Known for their bellicose ways, the Spartans were once the most feared people from Peloponnese to Persia. Cadaverous. X. Some actors take challenging roles in which they have to lose so much weight that they appear cadaverous. Cardinal. X. Most cultures consider gambling a cardinal sin and thus have outlawed its practice. Catalyst. X. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her bus seat acted as a catalyst for the civil rights movement, setting into motion historic changes for African Americans. Chauvinist. X. The chauvinist lives on both sides of the political spectrum, outright shunning anybody whose ideas are not consistent with his own. Check. X. Deserted for 6 months, the property began to look more like a jungle and less like a residence. Weeds grew unchecked in the front yard. Check. The condition of being held back or limited X when government abuses are not kept in check. The government is likely to become autocratic. Checkered. One that is marked by disreputable happenings. X one by one, the presidential candidates dropped out of the race, their respective checkered pasts, from embezzlement to infidelity, sabotaging their campaigns. Cogent. A cogent argument will change the minds of even the most skeptical audience. Contrite. Though he stole his little sister's licorice stick with malevolent glee, Chucky soon became contrite when his sister wouldn't stop crying. Corroborate. Her claim that frog populations were falling precipitously in Central America was corroborated by locals, who reported that many species of frogs had seemingly vanished overnight. Desecrate. After desecrating the pharaoh's tomb, the archaeologists soon fell victim to a horrible illness. Disparate. With the advent of machines capable of looking inside the brain, fields as disparate as religion and biology have been brought together by scientists trying to understand what happens in the brain when people have a religious experience. Errant. Unlike his peers, who spent their hours studying in the library, Matthew preferred errant walks through the university campus. Exhort. Nelson's parents exhorted him to study medicine, urging him to choose a respectable profession. Intransigent, Nelson left home to become a graffiti artist. Extenuating. Making less guilty or more forgivable. The jury was hardly moved by the man's plea that his loneliness was an extenuating factor in his crime of dognapping a prized pooch. Ferret. Ever the resourceful lexicographer, Fenton was able to ferret out the word origin of highly obscure words. Fleece. /X Many people have been fleeced by internet scams and never received their money back. Flush. The exam's passage is flush with difficult words, words that you may have learned only yesterday. Heyday. During the heyday of Prohibition, bootlegging had become such a lucrative business that many who had been opposed to the 18th Amendment began to fear it would be repealed. Hodgepodge. Those in attendance represented a hodgepodge of the city's denizens. Chimney sweepers could be seen sitting elbow to elbow with stockbrokers. Immaterial. The judge found the defendant's comments immaterial to the trial, and summarily dismissed him from the witness stand. Imponderable. According to many lawmakers, the huge variety of factors affecting society make devising an efficient healthcare system an imponderable task. Junta. An aggressive takeover by a group as dangerous of a threat as North Korea is. Some analysts believe that were a junta suddenly to gain power, it could be even more unpredictable and bellicose than the current leadership. Melee. After enduring daily taunts about my name, I became enraged and pummeled the schoolyard bully and his sycophantic friends in a brutal melee. Misanthrope. Hamilton had been deceived so many times in his life that he hid behind the gruff exterior of a misanthrope, lambasting perfect strangers for no apparent reason. Moment. Significant and important value. Despite the initial hullabaloo, the play was of no great moment in Hampton's writing career, and within a few years the public quickly forgot his foray into theatre arts. Paucity. There is a paucity of jobs hiring today that require menial skills, since most jobs have either been automated or outsourced. Pittance. A small amount. Vinny's uncle beamed smugly about how he'd offered his nephew $50 for his Harvard tuition. Even twice the amount would have been a mere pittance. Powwow. An informal meeting or discussion. Before the team takes the field, the coach always calls for a powwow so that he can make sure all the players are mentally in the right place. Preemptive. Done before someone else can do it. Just as Martha was about to take the only cookie left on the table, Noah preemptively swiped it. Pugnacious. The comedian told one flat joke after another, and when the audience started booing, he pugnaciously back at them, "Hey, you think this is easy? Why don't you buffoons give it a shot?" Raft. A large number of something. Despite a raft of city ordinances passed by an overzealous council, noise pollution continued unabated in the megalopolis. Replete. /X only weeks after the hurricane made landfall, the local supermarket shelves were replete with goods, so quick was the disaster relief response. Sanctimonious. Even during the quiet sanctity of evening prayer, she held her chin high, a sanctimonious sneer forming on her face as she eyed those who were attending church for the first time. Sanguine. With the prospect of having to learn 3,000 words during the course of the summer, Paul was anything but sanguine. Scintillating. Describes someone who is brilliant and lively. Richard Feynman was renowned for his scintillating lectures. The arcana of quantum physics was made lucid as he wrote animatedly on the chalkboard. Start. To suddenly move in a particular direction. All alone in the mansion, Henrietta started when she heard a sound. Stem. To stem the tide of applications, the prestigious Ivy requires that each applicant score at least 330 on the revised GRE. Unconscionable. Unreasonable, unscrupulous, excessive. The lawyer's demands were so unconscionable that rather than pay an exorbitant sum or submit himself to any other inconveniences, the defendant decided to find a new lawyer. Vicarious. Felt or undergone as if one were taking part in the experience or feelings of another. The advent of Twitter is a celebrity stalker's dream, as he or she can, through hundreds of intimate tweets, vicariously live the life of a famous person. Virago. Poor Billy was the victim of the virago's invective. She railed at him for a good 30 minutes about how he is the scum of the earth for speaking loudly on his cell phone in public. Wax. To gradually increase in size or intensity. Her enthusiasm for the diva's new album only waxed with each song. By the end of the album, it was her favorite CD yet. Replenish. Advocate. While the senator privately approved of gay marriage, he was unwilling to advocate for the cause in a public venue. Advocate. /X Martin Luther King Jr. was a tireless advocate for the rights of African Americans in the United States. Appreciable. /X There is an appreciable difference between those who say they can get the job done and those who actually get the job done. Apprehension. Test day can be one of pure apprehension, as many students worry about their test scores. Archaic. Hoping to sound intelligent, Mary spoke in archaic English that was right out of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Needless to say, she didn't have many friends. Ascendancy. The ascendancy of the Carlsbad water polo team is clear. They have a decade of championships behind them. Autonomously. Many of the factory workers are worried about being replaced by machines and computers that will work completely autonomously. Avid. X Martin is an avid birdwatcher, often taking long hikes into remote mountains to see some rare eagle. Boon. X modern technology has been a boon to the travel industry. Consummate. X Tyler was the consummate musician. He was able to play the guitar, harmonica, and the drum at the same time. Consummate. X The restoration of the ancient church was only consummated after 20 years of labor. Dearth. X I am surprised by the dearth of fast food chains. This is America and I assume they were on every street. Degrade. X Jesse had mockingly pointed out all of Nancy's faults in front of their friends, publicly degrading the poor girl. Deter. X His mother tried to deter him from joining the army, but he was too intoxicated with the idea of war to listen. Deter. X The government's primary job should involve deterring paths to war, not finding ways to start them. Discriminate. X Sarah couldn't discriminate between a good wine and a bad wine, so she avoided wine tastings. Disenfranchise. X The U.S. Constitution disenfranchised women until 1920 when they were given the right to vote. Disheartened. X After the visiting team scored 9 times, the home team's fans were disheartened, some leaving the game early. Elusive. Difficult to capture or difficult to remember. X Many first-time skydivers say that describing the act of falling from the sky is elusive. Endemic. Native, originating where it is found. X Irish cuisine makes great use of potatoes, but ironically, the potato is not endemic to Ireland. Entice. Promises. X Harold enticed his wife, Maud, to go on a vacation to Hawaii, with promises of lures on the beach and all-you-can-eat seafood buffets. Fate. X After World War II, war heroes were fated at first but quickly forgotten. Fledgling. Young and inexperienced, describing any new participant in some activity. X Murray has years of experience in family practice, but he is just a fledgling in surgery. Flounder. X Sylvia has excelled at advanced calculus, but ironically, when she has deal with taxes, she flounders. Guffaw. X Whenever the jester fell to the ground in mock pain, the king guffawed, exposing his yellow, fang-like teeth. Impede. X Since the police sergeant had to train the pair of new hires, progress in his own case was impeded. Impermeable. X The sandbags placed on the river formed an impermeable barrier, protecting the town from flooding. Incessant. Uninterrupted in time and indefinitely long continuing. X I don't mind small children in brief doses, but I think the incessant exposure that their parents have to them would quickly wear me down. Ingenuity. X Daedalus was famous for his ingenuity. He was able to fashion his son Icarus with a pair of wings, using wax to hold them together. Jocular. X My uncle was always in a jocular mood at family gatherings, messing up people's hair and telling knock-knock jokes to anyone who would listen. Malady. X The town was struck by a malady throughout the winter that left most people sick in bed for 2 weeks. Malleable. X The clay became malleable and easy to work with after a little water was added. Meander. X A casual observer might have thought that Peter was meandering through the city, but that day he was actually seeking out those places where he and his long-lost love had once visited. Moot. Open to argument or debate, undecidable in a meaningless or irrelevant way. X since the board just terminated Steve as the CEO. What the finance commit might have thought of his proposed marketing plan for next year is now a moot point. Morose. X after Stanley found out he was no longer able to go on vacation with his friends, he sat in his room morosely. Muted. Helen preferred muted earth colors such as green and brown to the bright pinks and red her sister liked. Obdurate. No number of pleas and bribes would get him to change his obdurate attitude. Ornate. The ornate Victorian and Edwardian homes spread throughout San Francisco are my favorite part of the city. Patronize. Treat condescendingly. To behave or treat in a condescending way. She says she genuinely wanted to help me, but instead she patronized me, constantly pointing out how I was inferior to her. Pithy. I enjoy reading the Diadegin for its pithy and insightful prose. It always gives me something to think about. Plodding. Slow and laborious. Charlie may seem to run at a plodding pace, but he is an ultra-marathoner, meaning he runs distances of up to 100 miles and can run for 10 hours at a stretch. Proponent. Ironically, the leading proponent of flat earth theory flies all over the world in an effort to win more adherents. Quandary. Steve certainly is in a quandary. If he doesn't call Elaine, she will blame him for everything, but if he does call her, the evidence of where he currently is could cost him his job. Raffish. The men found him raffish, but the women adored his smart clothes and casual attitude. Renege. We will no longer work with that vendor since it has reneged on nearly every agreement. Resolve. After much thought, Ted resolved not to travel abroad this summer because he didn't have much money in his bank account. Respite. Every afternoon, the small company has a respite in which workers play foosball or board games. Robust. Sturdy and strong in form, constitution, or construction. Chris preferred bland and mild beers, but Bavin preferred a beer with more robust flavor. Snide. The chairman interpreted Taylor's question about promotions as a snide remark, but in all innocence Taylor was trying to figure out the company's process. Stolid. Elephants may appear stolid to casual observers, but they actually have passionate emotional lives. Thwart. I wanted to spend a week in New York this autumn, but the high costs of travel and lodging thwarted my plans. Transitory. If we lived forever and life was not transitory, do you think we would appreciate life less or more? Altruism. Albert Schweitzer spent most of his life doing missionary work as a doctor in Africa, seeking no reward, apparently motivated only by altruism. Assail. In the weekly paper, the editor assailed the governor for wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars in public projects that quickly failed. Assuage. Her fear that the new college would be filled with unknown faces was assuaged when she recognized her childhood friend standing in line. Augment. Enlarge or increase. Improve. Ideally, the restaurant's augmented menu will expand its clientele and increase its profits. Breast augmentation. Banish. The most difficult part of the fast was banishing thoughts of food. Benign. I remember my grandfather's face was wrinkled, benign, and calm. Benign. Not dangerous to health, not recurrent or progressive. X the tumor located in your earlobe seems to be benign and should not cause you any trouble. Buck. X the profits at our firm buck the general downturn that affected the real estate industry. Commendable. X the efforts of the firefighters running into the burning building were commendable. Conducive. X studying in a quiet room is conducive to learning. Studying in a noisy environment makes learning more difficult. Contemptuous. X always on the forefront of fashion, Vanessa looked contemptuously at anyone wearing dated clothing. Cornucopia. X the International Food Expo was a cornucopia of culinary delights. Gourmet foods from every continent were under one roof. Credence. X he placed no credence in psychics, claiming that they offered no special powers beyond the ability to make people part with their money. Debase. X the third-rate script so debased the film that not even the flawless acting could save it from being a flop. Derisive. X I was surprised by her derisive tone. Usually, she is sweet, soft-spoken, and congenial. Detrimental. X many know that smoking is detrimental to your health, but processed sugar in large quantities is equally bad. Egotist. A conceited and self-centered person. X an egotist. Natasha had few friends because of her inability to talk about anything except her dream of becoming the next American Idol. Elaborate. X Thomas, on returning from Morocco, replaced his dirty grey carpet with an elaborate one he'd brought back with him. Elaborate. X most high school physics teachers find themselves elaborating the same point over and over again, since many concepts confuse students. Empathetic. X most discrimination and hatred is based on a lack of empathetic awareness of people that have the same aspirations and fears. Euphoria. A feeling of great elation, happiness. X the euphoria of winning her first gold medal in the 100-meter dash overwhelmed Shelley Ann Fraser and she wept tears of immense joy. Facetious. X facetious behavior will not be tolerated during sex education class. It's time for all of you to treat these matters like mature adults. Fickle. X she was so fickle in her politics, it was hard to pinpoint her beliefs. One week she would embrace a side, and the next week she would denounce it. Genial. X Betty is a genial young woman. Everyone she meets is put at ease by her elegance and grace. Genteel. X a live string quartet would provide a more genteel air to the wedding than would a folk singer. Glib. Speaking with ease but without sincerity. I have found that the more glib the salesman, the worse the product. Donald J. Trump. Grovel. X every time Susan comes to the office, Frank grovels as if she were about to fire. Hamstrung. Made ineffective or powerless. X the FBI has made so many restrictions on the local police that they are absolutely hamstrung, unable to accomplish anything. Illicit. X though Al Capone was engaged in many illicit activities, he was finally arrested for income tax evasion, a relatively minor offense. Impeccable. X he was impeccably dressed in the latest fashion without a single crease or stain. Inadvertent. X although prohibition was rooted in noble ideals, the inadvertent and costly consequences of making alcohol illegal in the US led it to the repeal. Irresolute. X he stood irresolute at the split in the trail, not sure which route would lead back to the camp. Jargon. a characteristic language of a particular group X. To those with little training in medicine, the jargon of doctors can be very difficult to understand. Lucid. Transparently clear, easily understandable X. Though Walters writes about physics and time travel, his writing is always lucid, so readers with little scientific training can understand difficult concepts. Marshall. Americans tend to remember Abraham Lincoln as kindly and wise, not at all martial, despite the fact that he was involved in the fiercest war America has even fought. Perennial. Even at the old-timers games, Stan Musial would get the loudest cheer. He was a perennial favorite of the fans there. Perpetuate. If you do not let him do things for himself, you are merely perpetuating bad habits that will be even harder to break in the future. Pertinent. While the salaries of the players might draw attention in the media, such monetary figures are not pertinent to the question of who plays the best on the field. Precedent. The principal explained that even though one student had done modeling work outside of school, the outfit that student wore in those photographs in no way established a precedent for what could be worn at school dances. Pristine. The glacial lake was pristine and we filled our canteens to drink deeply. Rankle. Gnaw into, make resentful or angry His constant whistling would rankle her, sometimes causing her to leave in a huff. Sentimental. Especially in art, music, and literature I don't like romanticism for the same reason I don't like melodramatic acting and soap operas, overly sentimental. Smattering. I know only a smattering of German, but Helen is able to read German newspapers and converse with natives. Spurn. She spurned all his flattery and proposals, and so he walked off embarrassed and sad. Surly. Every morning, Bevan was a surly unhappy person, but once he ate breakfast, he became loving, laughing, and a joy to be around. Tawdry. Carol expected to find New York City magical, the way so many movies had portrayed it, but she was surprised how often tawdry displays took the place of genuine elegance. Tumult. Riots broke out just in front of our apartment building, and the tumult continued late into the night. Uncompromising. The relationship between Bart and Hilda ultimately failed because they were both so uncompromising, never wanting to change their opinions. Unruly. Walk into any preschool and I am sure that you will find an unruly and chaotic scene, unless it's nap time. Urbane. Sophisticated because of his service as an intelligence officer and his refined tastes. W. Somerset Maugham became the inspiration for the urbane and sophisticated by James Bond. Vacuous. To the journalist's pointed question, the senator gave a vacuous response, mixing a few of his overall campaign slogans with platitudes and completely avoiding the controversial subject of the question. Whimsical. Adults look to kids and envy their whimsical nature at times, wishing that they could act without reason and play without limitation. Contempt. 1. The feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving scorn. 2. Disregard for something that should be taken into account. 3. The offense of being disobedient to or disrespectful of a court of law and its officers. Aphoristic. /X Sometimes one can't stand Nathan because he tries to impress everyone by being aphoristic, but he just states the obvious. Brusquely. Not one for social pleasantries. The chief of staff would brusquely ask his subordinate anything he wanted, even coffee. candidness. Although I was unhappy that the relationship ended, I appreciated her candidness about why she was ready to move on from the relationship. Collusion. Many have argued that Lee Harvey Oswald, JFK's assassin, was in collusion with other criminals. Others maintain that Oswald was a lone gunman. Complacent. After the water polo team won their 6th championship, they became complacent and didn't even make it to the playoffs the next year. Conniving. Taking part in immoral and unethical plots. The queen was so conniving that, with the help of the prince, she tried to overthrow the king. Convoluted. Highly complex or intricate. Instead of solving the math problem in 3 simple steps, Kumar used a convoluted solution requiring 15 steps. Credulity. Virginia's wide-eyed credulity as a 5-year-old was replaced by suspicion after she learned that Santa Claus didn't really exist. Derogative. Never before have we seen a debate between 2 political candidates that was so derogative and filthy. Destitute. Jean Valjean is at first destitute, but through the grace of a priest, he makes something of his life. Devolve. Pass on or delegate to another. The company was full of managers known for devolving tasks to lower management, but never doing much work themselves. Discord. Despite all their talented players, the team was filled with discord. Some players refused to talk to others and lost most of their games. Eek. Stranded in a cabin over the winter, Terry was able to eke out an existence on canned food. Elude. Escape understanding. Even a basic understanding of physics can elude most high school students. Embellish. McCartney would write relatively straightforward lyrics, and Lennon would embellish them with puns and poetic images. Enmity. Charles' rude remark towards Sarah yesterday was due to his illness, not due to any real enmity towards Sarah. Exasperate. As a child, I exasperated my mother with strings of never-ending questions. Exemplify. Lincoln exemplified the best of not only America, but also the potential greatness that exists within each person. Foible. A behavioral attribute that is distinctive and peculiar to an individual. When their new roommate sat staring at an oak tree for an hour, Marcia thought it indicated a mental problem, but Jeff assured her it was a harmless foible. Goad. Doug did not want to enter the race, but Jim, through a steady stream of taunts, goaded him into signing up for it. Impending. The impending doom of our world has been discussed and debated for 2,000 years, maybe even longer. Impregnable. Incapable of being tampered with. As a child, Amy would build pillow castles and pretend they were impregnable fortresses. Irk. My little sister has a way of irking and annoying me like no other person. Leery. Openly distrustful and unwilling to confide. Without checking his references and talking to previous employers. I am leery of hiring the candidate. Malevolent. Villains are known for their malevolent nature, oftentimes inflicting cruelty on others just for enjoyment. Maxim. /X Johnson initially suggests that the secret to business can be summarized in a single maxim, but then requires a 300-page book to explain exactly what he means. Obstinate. The coach suggested improvements Sarah might make on the balance beam, but she remained obstinate, unwilling to modify any of the habits that made her successful in the past. pastoral. Those who imagine America's countryside as a pastoral region are often disappointed to learn that much of rural US is filled with cornfields extending as far as the eye can see. Peevish. Our office manager is peevish, so the rest of us tiptoe around him, hoping not to set off another one of his fits. Perturb. Disturb in mind or cause to be worried or alarmed. Now that Henry is recovering from a major illnesses, he no longer lets the little trivialities such as late mail perturb him. Placid. Doug is normally placid, so we were all shocked to see him yelling at the television when the Mets lost the game. Ploy. Dennis arranged an elaborate ploy involving 14 different people lying for him in different situations so that it could appear that he was meeting Mary completely by chance at the wedding reception. Presumption. When Mr. Baker found out the family car was gone, he acted under the presumption that his rebellious son had taken the car, calling his son's phone and yelling at him. Only later did Mr. Baker realize that Mrs. Baker had simply gone out to get her nails done. Presumption. The new neighbor quickly gained a reputation for her presumption. She had invited herself to several of the neighbors' homes, often stopping over at inopportune times and asking for a drink. Quip. In one of the most famous quips about classical music, Mark Twain said, "Wagner's music is better than it sounds." Rash. Although Bruce was able to make the delivery in time with a nighttime motorcycle ride in the rain, Susan criticized his actions as rash. Reservation. I was initially excited by the idea of a trip to Washington, D.C., but now that I have read about the high crime statistics there, I have some reservations. Retract. Email is wonderfully efficient, but once something awkward or damaging has been sent, there is no way to retract it. Savvy. A perceptive understanding. Although a great CEO, he did not have the political savvy to win the election. Serene. I'd never seen him so serene. Usually, he was a knot of stress and anxiety from hours of trading on the stock exchange. Smug. When Phil was dating the model, he had a smug attitude that annoyed his buddies. Squander. Fearing his money would be squandered by his family, he gave all of it to charity when he died. Steadfast. A good captain needs to be steadfast, continuing to hold the wheel and stay the course even during the most violent storm. Tact. In a tremendous display of tact, Shelley was able to maintain a strong friendship with Marcia, even though Marcia's husband, Frank, confessed to finding Shelley more attractive than Marcia. Tarnish. Pete Rose was one of the best baseball players of his generation, but his involvement with gambling on baseball games has tarnished his image in the eyes of many. Taxing. Used to the limit. Exhaust. The hike to the summit of Mount Whitney was so taxing that I could barely speak or stand up. Tout. Advertise in strongly positive terms. Show off. At the conference, the CEO touted the extraordinary success of his company's research and development division. Travail. Use of physical or mental energy, hard work, agony or anguish. While they experienced nothing but travails in refinishing the kitchen, they completed the master bedroom in less than a weekend. Unprecedented. Having never been done or known before. Novel. When America first created its national parks, the idea of setting aside the most beautiful land in a country was unprecedented in the history of mankind. Unseemly. He acted in an unseemly manner, insulting the hostess and then speaking ill of her deceased husband. Analogous. X. In many ways, the Internet's transformative effect on society has been analogous to that of the printing press. Antedated. /X. Harry was so unknowledgeable that he was unaware the Egyptian pharaohs antedated the American Revolution. Ascribe. X. History ascribes the Odyssey and the Iliad to Homer, but scholars now debate whether he was a historical figure or a fictitious name. Avert. /X. Afraid to see the aftermath of the car crash, I averted my eyes as we drove by. Begrudge. X. Sitting all alone in his room, Harvey begrudged the happiness of the other children playing outside his window. Behooves. To be one's duty or obligation. X. The teacher looked down at the student and said, "It would behoove you to be in class on time and complete your homework, so that you don't repeat freshman English for a third straight year." Belittle. X. A teacher will never belittle his students, but will instead empower them. Besmirch. X. The prince's distasteful choice of words besmirched not only his own name, but the reputation of the entire royal family. Buttress. X. China's economy has been buttressed by a global demand for the electronic parts the country manufactures. Cavalier. Given to haughty disregard of others, X. Percy dismissed the issue with a cavalier wave of his hand, an arrogant and cavalier attitude toward others. Cerebral. X. A cerebral analysis of most pop music finds it to be simple and childish, but that ignores the point, the music's effect on the listener. Clemency. X. In the final moments of the trial, during his closing speech, Phillips was nearly begging the judge for clemency. Coalesce. X. Over time, the various tribes coalesced into a single common culture with one universal language. Cohesive. Well integrated, forming a united whole. X. A well-written, cohesive essay will keep on topic at all times, never losing sight of the main argument. Consecrate. To make holy or set apart for a high purpose. X. At the Church of Notre Dame in France, the new high altar was consecrated in 1182. Conundrum. A difficult problem. X. Computers have helped solve some of the mathematical conundrums which have puzzled man for many centuries. Delegate. X. Since the senior manager had to go on many international business trips, she was forced to delegate many of her responsibilities to two lower-level managers. Deride. X. The nun derided the students for trying to sneak insects and worms into the classroom. Docile. X. Barnyard animals are considerably more docile than the wild animals. Eccentric. X. Mozart was well known for his eccentricities, often speaking words backward to confuse those around him. Emulate. X. To really become fluent in a new language, emulate the speech patterns and intonation of people who speak the language. Even-handed. X. Teachers often have trouble being even-handed to all of their varied students. Fawn. X. The media fawned over the handsome new CEO, praising his impeccable sense of style instead of asking more pointed questions. Finagle. Obtain something by means of trickery or devious or dishonest methods. X. Stephen was able to finagle one of the last seats on the train by convincing the conductor that his torn stub was actually a valid ticket. Foolhardy. X. The police regularly face dangerous situations, so for a police officer not to wear his bulletproof vest is foolhardy. Glean. X-Herb has given us no formal statement about his background, but from various hints I have gleaned that he grew up in difficult circumstances. Humdrum. X, having grown up in a humdrum suburb, Jacob relished life in New York City after moving. Implicate. X, by saying that some of the guests were uncomfortable, the manager implicated to the hotel staff that it needed to be more diligent. Incense. X, when her bought football tickets for a game on the day of their wedding anniversary, Jill was incensed. Incumbent. As a duty or responsibility, ex-middle managers at times make important decisions, but real responsibility for the financial well-being of the corporation is ultimately incumbent on the CEO. Industrious. Ex-Pete was an industrious student, completing every assignment thoroughly and on time. Insipid. X, the movie director, was known for hiring beautiful actors in order to deflect attention away from the insipid scripts he would typically use. Intermittent. Stopping and starting at irregular intervals. X, the intermittent thunder continued and the night was punctuated by cracks of lightning, a serial sleepless night. Irascible. X, if Arthur's dog is not fed adequately, he becomes highly irascible, even growling at his own shadow. Lethargic. X, nothing can make a person more lethargic than a big turkey dinner. Melancholy. X, Hamlet is a figure of tremendous melancholy. He doesn't have a truly cheerful scene throughout the entire play. Piquant. X, the chef, with a mere flick of the salt shaker, turned the bland tomato soup into a piquant meal. Precarious. X, people smoke to relax and forget their cares, but ironically, in terms of health risks, smoking is far more precarious than either mountain climbing or skydiving. Preempt. X, a governmental warning about an imminent terrorist attack would preempt ordinary network programming on television. Presumptuous. X, many felt that Barney was presumptuous in moving into the large office before the management even made any official announcement of his promotion. Prevail. X, during the labor negotiations, an air of hostility prevailed in the office. Prevail. X, before the cricket match, Australia was heavily favoured, but India prevailed. Profusion. X, when Maria reported that she had been visited by Jesus Christ and had proof, a profusion of reporters and journalists descended on the town. Rakish. X, as soon as he arrived in the city, the rakish young man bought some drugs and headed straight for the seedy parts of town. Redress. X, Barry forgot his wife's birthday 2 years in a row and was only able to redress his oversight by surprising his wife with a trip to Tahiti. Rile. X-Dan is usually calm and balanced, but it takes only one intense glare from Sabrina to rile him. Tribulation. X, as of 2013, nearly 1.5 million Syrians have fled their country hoping to escape the tribulations of a civil war tearing their country to pieces. Uncanny. X, Reggie has an uncanny ability to connect with animals. Feral cats will readily approach him, and sometimes even wild birds will land on his finger. Veneer. X, Mark Twain referred to the Victorian period in America as the Gilded Age, implying the ample moral corruption that lay beneath a mere veneer of respectability. Wanton. X, due to wanton behavior and crude language, the drunk man was thrown out of the bar and asked to never return. Abysmal. Extremely bad. Ex-coach Ramsey took his newest player off the field after watching a few painful minutes of her abysmal performance. Amply. More than is adequate. The boat was amply supplied for its year at sea. No man would go hungry or thirst. Antiquated. Aunt Betty had antiquated notions about marriage, believing that a man should court a woman for at least a year before receiving a kiss. Aphorism. Nietzsche was known for using aphorisms, sometimes encapsulating a complex philosophical thought in a mere sentence. Balk. The students were willing to clean up the broken glass, but when the teacher asked them to mop the entire floor, they balked, citing reasons why they needed to leave. Boorish. Bukowski was known for being a boorish drunk and alienating close friends and family. Carping. What seemed like incessant nagging and carping about my behavior from my mother turned out to be wise and useful advice that has served me well. Champion. Martin Luther King Jr. championed civil rights fiercely throughout his short life. Chivalrous. Being attentive to women like an ideal knight. Marco's chivalrous ways, like opening doors and pulling out chairs, was much appreciated by his date. Colossal. Few appreciate the colossal scale of the sun. If hollow, it could contain 1,000,000 Earths. Complimentary. The head waiter was careful to tell the amateur diners that red wine was complimentary with beef, each bringing out subtle taste notes in the other. Compound. Make more intense, stronger, or more marked. Her headache was compounded by the construction crew outside, which had 6 jackhammers going at the same time. Constraint. He found pop music a constraint on his ability to learn and preferred to listen to classical music while studying. Convivial. The wedding reception was convivial. Friends who hadn't seen each other for ages drank and ate together before heading to the dance floor. Cosmopolitan. Comprising many cultures, global in reach and outlook. There are few cities in the world as diverse and cosmopolitan as New York. Creditable. Critics agreed the movie was creditable, but few gave it more than 3 out of 5 stars. Cumbersome. Only 10 years ago, being an avid reader and a traveler meant carrying a cumbersome backpack stuffed with books. These days we need only any reader. Debunk. Expose as false ideas and claims, especially while ridiculing. Richard Dawkins tries to debunk religious belief, but his ridicule tends to push people away from his points rather than convince them. Decimation. The decimation after atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is incomprehensible. Deliberate. Emergency situations such as this call for immediate action and leave no room to deliberate over options. Differentiate. Mozart's long melodic lines differentiate his compositions from other works of late 18th century music. Dilapidated. The main house has been restored but the gazebo is still dilapidated and unusable. Discreet. The professor thought that he was discreet, subtly wiping the stain off of his shirt, but as soon as he stepped off the podium a member of the audience pointed out the large ketchup stain. Dispatch. She finished her thesis with dispatch, amazing her advisors who couldn't believe she hadn't written 60 scholarly pages so quickly. Enumerate. Determine the number or amount of The survey enumerates the number of happy workers and the number of unhappy workers. Evasive. X his responses were clearly evasive. He obviously did not want to take on any responsibility or any new work. Excruciating. Extremely painful. X after the boulder rolled a couple of feet, pinning my friend's arm. He experienced excruciating pain. Futile. X I thought I could repair the car myself, but after 2 days of work with no success, I have to admit that my efforts were futile. Hamper. Prevent the progress or free movement of X as the rainwater began to collect in pools on the highway. It began to hamper the flow of traffic. Inarticulate. X although a brilliant economist, Professor Black was completely inarticulate, a terrible lecturer. Inkling. X-Lin speaks 4 Romance languages, but she doesn't have an inkling about how East Asian languages are structured. Laborious. X the most laborious job I've had was working 20 hours a day as a fisherman in King Salmon, Alaska. Malodorous. X some thermally active fountains spew sulfur fumes. The air around them is sometimes so malodorous that many have to plug their noses. Miscreant. X come back you miscreant, yelled the woman who just had her purse stolen. Misogynist. X many have accused Hemingway of being a quiet misogynist, but recently unearthed letters argue against this belief. Morph. To undergo dramatic change in a seamless and barely noticeable fashion. X the earnestness of the daytime talk shows of the 1970s has morphed into something far more sensational and vulgar. Today guests actually stand up and threaten to take swings at one another. Obliging. X even after all his success, I found him to be accommodating and obliging, sharing with me his secret tips on how to gain wealth and make friends. Paradoxical. X that light could be both a particle and a wave seems paradoxical, but nonetheless it is true. Perquisite. X even as the dishwasher at the French restaurant, Josh quickly learned that he had the perquisite of being able to eat terrific food for half the price diners would pay. Provisional. X until the corporate office hands down a definitive decision on use of the extra offices, we will share their use in a provisional arrangement. Quam. X while he could articulate no clear reason why Harkner's plan would fail, he nevertheless felt qualms about committing any resources to it. Relegate. X when Dexter was unable to fulfill his basic duties, instead of firing him, the boss relegated him to kitchen cleanup. Resignation. X since Jack could not think of a convincing reason why he had to miss the seminar, he attended it with a sense of resignation. Snub. X Wheeler was completely qualified for the committee, but the board snubbed him, choosing an obviously lesser qualified candidate instead. Sordid. X the nightly news simply announced that the senator had had an affair, but the tabloid published all the sordid details of the interaction. Stayed. Frank came from a staid environment, so he was shocked that his college roommate sold narcotics. Stymie. X the engineers found their plans stymied at every turn and were ultimately able to make lost no progress on the project. Vanquish. X for years, Argentina would dominate in World Cup qualifying matches, only to be vanquished by one of the European countries during the late stages of the tournament. Vi. X while the other teams in the division actively vie for the championship, this team seems content simply to go through the motions of playing. Alacrity. The first 3 weeks at his new job, Mark worked with such alacrity that upper management knew it would be giving him a promotion. Anathema. /X hundreds of years ago, Galileo was anathema to the church. Today the church is anathema to some on the left side of the political spectrum. Apogee. The apogee of the Viennese style of music. Mozart's music continues to mesmerize audiences well into the 21st century. Apostate. An apostate of the Republican Party. Sheldon has yet to become affiliated with any party and dubs himself an independent. Arrant. Usually in negative sense, an arrant fool. Lawrence surprised nobody when he lost all his money in a pyramid scheme that was every bit as transparent as it was corrupt. Artless. Despite the president's seemingly artless speeches, he was a skilled and ruthless negotiator. Artlessness. I, personally, found the artlessness of her speech charming. Attenuate. To taper off, become thinner. Her animosity towards Bob attenuated over the years, and she even went so far as to invite him to her party. Base. She was not so base as to begrudge the beggar the unwanted crumbs from her dinner plate. Beg. By assuming that Charlie was headed to college, which he was not, Maggie begged the question when she asked him to which school he was headed in the fall. Byzantine. Getting a driver's license is not simply a matter of taking a test. The regulations and procedures are so Byzantine that many have found themselves at the mercy of the Department of Motor Vehicles. Catholic. Jonah's friend said that Jonah's taste in music was eclectic. Jonah was quick to point out that not only was his taste eclectic but it was also Catholic. He enjoyed music from countries as far-flung as Mali and Mongolia. Jack was wary of GRE words that looked similar because they usually had different definitions. Not so with cherry, a word that he began to use interchangeably with wary. Choleric. While a brilliant lecturer, Mr. Dawson came across as choleric and unapproachable. Very rarely did students come to his office hours. Churlish. The manager was unnecessarily churlish to his subordinates, rarely deigning to say hello, but always quick with a sartorial jab if someone happened to be wearing anything even slightly mismatching. Conciliate. His opponents believed his gesture to be conciliatory, yet as soon as they put down their weapons, he unsheathed a hidden sword. Contentious. Since old Grandpa Harry became very contentious during the summer when only reruns were on TV, the grandkids learned to hide from him at every opportunity. Cow. Do not be cowed by a 3,000-word vocabulary list. Turn that list into a deck of flashcards. Defray. In order for Sean to attend the prestigious college, his generous uncle helped defray the excessive tuition with a monthly donation. Diatribe. Steve's mom launched into a diatribe during the PTA meeting, contending that the school was little more than a daycare in which students stare at the wall and teachers stare at the chalkboard. Equivocate. After Sharon brought the car home an hour after her curfew, she equivocated when her parents pointedly asked her where she had been. Exegesis. The Bible is fertile ground for exegesis. Over the past 5 centuries there have been as many interpretations as there are pages in the Old Testament. Expansive. After a few sips of cognac, the octogenarian shed his irascible demeanor and became expansive, speaking fondly of the good old days. Expunge. When I turned 18, all of the shoplifting and jaywalking charges were expunged from my criminal record. Factious. The controversial bill proved factious, as dissension even within parties resulted. Factitious. The defendant's story was largely factitious and did not accord with eyewitness testimonies. Fecus. Lazy and irresponsible. 2 years after graduation, Charlie still lived with his parents and had no job, becoming more feckless with each passing day. Fractious. We rarely invite my fractious uncle over for dinner. He always complains about the food, and usually launches into a tirade on some touchy subject. Hector. The boss's hectoring manner put off many employees, some of whom quit as soon as they found new jobs. Imbibe. Plato imbibed Socrates' teachings to such an extent that he was able to write volumes of work that he directly attributed, sometimes word for word, to Socrates. Indigent. In the so-called Third World, many are indigent and only a privileged few have the resources to enjoy material luxuries. Indigent. The indigents, huddled under the overpass, tried to start a small bonfire in the hope of staying warm. Insufferable. Jester always tried to find some area in which he excelled above others. Unsurprisingly, his co-workers found him insufferable and chose to exclude him from daily luncheons out. Jingoist. Kowtow. Paul kowtowed to his boss so often the boss herself became nauseated by his sycophancy. Lascivious. Lolita is a challenging novel for many, not necessarily because of the elevated prose style but because of the depravity of the main character, Humbert, who, as an old, lascivious man, falls in love with a girl. Malfeasance. Not even the mayor's trademark pearly-toothed grin could save him from charges of malfeasance. While in power, he'd been running an illegal gambling rink in the room behind his office. Nadir. For many pop music fans, the rap and alternative rock-dominated 90s were the nadir of musical expression. Overweening. Mark was so convinced of his basketball skills that in his overweening pride he could not fathom that his name was not on the varsity list. He walked up to the basketball coach and told her she had forgotten to add his name. Pariah. The once eminent scientist, upon being found guilty of faking his data, has become a pariah in the research community. Penurious. Truly penurious, Mary had nothing more than a jar full of pennies. Perfunctory. /X The short film examines modern perfunctory cleaning rituals such as washing dishes, doing laundry and toothbrushing. Ponderous. Laden with 20 kilograms of college textbooks, the freshman moved ponderously across the campus. Precipitate. Instead of conducting a thorough investigation after the City Hall break-in, the governor acted precipitately, accusing his staff of aiding and abetting the criminals. Precipitate. The government's mishandling the hurricane's aftermath precipitated a widespread outbreak of looting and other criminal activity. Prosaic. Unlike the talented artists in his workshop, Paul had no such bent for the visual medium, so when it was time for him to make a stained glass painting, he ended up with a prosaic mosaic. Saturnine. Deprived of sunlight, humans become saturnine. That's why in very northerly territories people are encouraged to sit under an extremely powerful lamp, lest they become morose. Sedulous. X, an avid numismatist, Harold sedulously amassed a collection of coins from over 100 countries, an endeavor that took over 15 years and to 5 continents. Superfluous. Truculence. X. When the boss confronted Aaron about his earlier remarks, Aaron responded with utter truculence, simply throwing a glass of water in the boss' face and walking away. Turpitude. X. During his reign, Caligula indulged in unspeakable sexual practices, so it's not surprising that he will forever be remembered for his turpitude. Untoward. X. Some professors find teaching untoward as having to prepare for lectures and conduct office hours prevents them from focusing on their research. Vicissitude. X. Even great rulers have their vicissitudes. Massive kingdoms have diminished overnight, and once beloved kings have faced the scorn of angry masses. Zeitgeist. /X. Each decade has its own zeitgeist. The 1990s was a prosperous time in which the promise of the American dream never seemed more palpable. Apotheosis. Noun. X. As difficult as it is to imagine, the apotheosis of Mark Zuckerberg's career, many believe, is yet to come. Arch. Adjective. X. The Baroness was arch, making playful asides to the townspeople, yet because they couldn't pick up on her dry humor, they thought her supercilious. Arrivist. Noun. X. The city censure was aflutter with arrivists who each tried to outdo one another with their ostentatious sports cars and chic evening dress. Benighted. Adjective. X. Far from being a period of utter benightedness, the medieval ages produced some great works of theological speculation. Bilious. Adjective. X. Rex was bilious all morning, and his face would only take on a look of contentedness when he'd had his morning cup of coffee. Blinkered. Adjective. X. In gambling, the addict is easily blinkered by past successes and or past failures, forgetting that the outcome of any one game is independent of the games that preceded it. Cupidity. Noun. X. Some believe people that amassing as much wealth as possible is the meaning to life, yet they often realize that cupidity brings anything but happiness. Curmudgeon. Noun. X. Since Uncle Mike was the family curmudgeon, each Thanksgiving he was plied with copious amounts of wine, in the hope that he would become less grouchy. Disabuse. Verb. X. As a child, I was quickly disabused of the notion that Santa Claus was a rotund benefactor of infinite largesse. One night I saw my mother diligently wrapping presents and storing them under our Christmas tree. Excoriate. Verb. X. Entrusted with the prototype to his company's latest smartphone, Larry, during a late-night karaoke bout, let the prototype slip into the hands of a rival company. The next day Larry was excoriated, and then fired. Execrate. Verb. X. Though the new sitcom did decently in the ratings, Nelson railed against the show, saying that it was nothing more than an execrable pastiche of tired clichés and canned laughter. Expurgate. Verb. X. The censor expurgated every reference to sex and drugs, converting the rapper's raunchy flow into a series of bleeps. Factitious. Adjective. X. The defendant's story was largely factitious and did not accord with eyewitness testimonies. Fell. Adjective. X. For fans of the Harry Potter series, the fell Lord Voldemort, who terrorized poor Harry for 7 lengthy installments, has finally been vanquished by the forces of good, unless, that is, J.K. Rowling decides to come out of retirement. Gerrymander. Verb. X. Years ago, savvy politicians had gerrymandered the city centre to ensure their re-election. Hedge. Verb X when asked why he had decided to buy millions of shares at the very moment the tech company's stock soared, the CEO hedged, mentioning something vague about gut instinct. Histrionic. Adjective X though she received a B on the test, she had such a histrionic outburst that one would have thought that she'd been handed a death sentence. Imbroglio. None X the chef cook-off featured one gourmand who had the unfortunate distinction of mixing the wrong broths, creating an imbroglio that diners would not soon forget. Impecunious. Adjective X in extremely trying times, even the moderately wealthy, after a few turns of ill fortune, can become impecunious. Invective. Noun X the internet has unleashed the invectives in many of us. Many people post stinging criticism on the comment section underneath newspaper articles or YouTube videos. Jaundice. Adjective X Shelley was jaundiced towards Olivia, though the two had once been best friends. Olivia had become class president, prom queen, and, to make matters worse, the girlfriend of the one boy Shelley liked. Jejune. Adjective X although many top chefs have secured culinary foam's popularity in haute cuisine, Waters criticizes it for being jejune and unfilling. Juggernaut. None X Napoleon was considered a juggernaut until he decided to invade Russia in winter, after which his once indomitable army was decimated by cold and famine. Limpid. Adjective X her limpid prose made even the most recondite subjects accessible to all. Malapropism. None X whenever I looked glum, my mother would offer to share an amusing anecdote with me, an endearing malapropism of anecdote that never failed to cheer me up. Martinet. None X the job seemed perfect to Rebecca until she found out that her boss was a total martinet. After each project the boss would come by to scrutinize and inevitably criticize every little detail of the work Rebecca had done. Maudlin. Adjective X just as those who were alive during the 70s are mortified that they once cavorted about in bell-bottoms, many who lived during the 80s are now aghast at the maudlin pop songs they used to enjoy. Really, just what exactly is a total eclipse of the heart? Mellifluous. Adjective X Chelsea's grandmother thought Franz Schubert's music to be the most mellifluous ever written. Chelsea demurred, and to her grandmother's chagrin, would blast Rihanna on the home stereo speakers. Metalsome. Adjective X for its raid on the Bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, SEAL Team 6 has become, for many Americans, the embodiment of metal. Mulked. Verb X the so-called magical diet cure simply ended up mulcting Maria out of hundreds of dollars, but did nothing for her weight. Palimpsest. Parvenu. None X the theatre was full of parvenus who each thought that they were surrounded by true aristocrats. Peremptory. Adjective X my sister used to peremptorily tell me to do the dishes, a chore I would either do perfunctorily or avoid doing altogether. Phantasmagorical. Adjective elusive, unreal X those suffering from malaria fall into a feverish sleep, their world a whirligig of phantasmagoria. If they recover, they are unsure of what actually took place and what was simply a product of their febrile imaginations. Picawan. Adjective trifling or petty X English teachers are notorious for being picawan. However, the English language is so nuanced and sophisticated that often such teachers are not being contrary but are only adhering to the rules. Pollyannish. Adjective extremely optimistic X even in the midst of a lousy sales quarter, Debbie remained Pollyannish, never losing her shrill voice and wide smile even when prospective customers hung up on her. Propitiate. Verb X. The two sons, plying their angry father with cheesy neckties for Christmas, were hardly able to propitiate him. The father already had a drawer full of ones he had never worn before or ever planned to. Protean. Adjective X. Peter Sellers was truly a protean actor. In Doctor Strangelove he played three very different roles: a jingoist general, a sedate president and a deranged scientist. Pyrrhic. Adjective describing a victory that comes at such a great cost that the victory is not worthwhile. X. George W. Bush's winning the 2000 election was in many ways a Pyrrhic victory. The circumstances of his win alienated half of the US population. Quisling. Noun X. History looks unfavourably upon Quislings. Indeed they are recorded about the same fondness as Nero, he who watched his city burn down while playing the violin. Quixotic. Adjective X. For every 1,000 startups with quixotic plans to be the next big name in e-commerce, only a handful ever become profitable. Remonstrate. Verb X. The mothers of the kidnapped victims remonstrated to the rogue government to release their children, claiming that the detention violated human rights. Sangfroid. Noun calmness or poise in difficult situations. X. The hostage negotiator exhibited a sangfroid that oftentimes was more menacing than the sword at his throat or the gun at his head. Sartorial. Adjective related to fashion or clothes. X. Monty was astute at navigating the world of finance. Sartorially, however, he was found wanting. He typically would attempt to complement his beige tie with a grey suit and white pants. Schadenfreude. Noun X. From his warm apartment window, Stanley revelled in schadenfreude as he laughed at the figures below, huddled together in the Arctic chill. Sententious. Adjective X. The old man, casting his nose up in the air at the group of adolescents, intoned sententiously, "Youth is wasted on the young." Sybarite. Noun X. Despite the fact that he'd maxed out 15 credit cards, Max was still a sybarite at heart. When the police found him, he was at a $1,000 an hour spa in Manhattan, getting a facial treatment. Tendentious. Adjective X. Because political mudslinging has become a staple of the 24-hour media cycle, most of us, despite protestations to the contrary, are tendentious on many of today's pressing issues. Venial. Adjective Easily excused or forgiven. Pardonable. X. His traffic violations ran the gamut from the venial to the egregious. On one occasion he simply did not come to a complete stop. Another time he tried to escape across state lines at speeds in excess of 140 miles per hour. Vituperate. Adjective X. Jason had dealt with disciplinarians before, but nothing prepared him for the first week of boot camp, as drill sergeants vituperated him for petty oversights such as forgetting to double knot the laces on his boots. Anemic. Adjective lacking energy and vigor. X. After 3 straight shows, the lead actress gave an anemic performance the 4th night, barely speaking loudly enough for those in the back rows to hear. Anodyne. Noun X. Music which is played in department stores is intended to be an anodyne, but is often so cheesy and over the top that customers become irritated. Anodyne. Adjective not likely to provoke offense. Inoffensive. X. Wilbur enjoyed a spicy Mexican breakfast, but Jill preferred a far more anodyne meal in the mornings. Approbatory. Adjective expressing praise or approval. X. Although it might not be her best work, Hunter's new novel has received generally approbatory reviews. Bowdlerize. Verb /X. To receive an R rating. The entire movie was bowdlerized because it contained so much violence and grotesque subject matter. Seed. Verb. Relinquish possession or control over X. Eventually, all parents must cede control of their growing children's educations and allow their offspring some autonomy. Charlatan. Noun X. You may call him a motivational speaker, but I call him a charlatan. He doesn't have any idea what he's really talking about. Derelict. Adjective. Not doing one's duties. X. The teacher was derelict in her duties because she hadn't graded a single student paper in 3 weeks. Derelict. Noun. Abandoned. X. At one time the waterfront factories were busy and productive, but now they stand derelict and will be torn down. Duplicity. Noun X. A life of espionage is one of duplicity. An agent must pretend to be a totally different person than who she or he actually is. Effrontery. Noun. Behavior that you have no right to. X. The skateboarders acted with effrontery, skating through the church grounds and spray painting signs warning trespassers. Enjoin. Verb. X. The government agency enjoined the chemical company to clean up the hazardous dump it had created over the years. Enthrall. Verb. X. She was so enthralled by the movie that she never heard people scream out "Fire! Fire!" in the neighboring theater. Epiphany. Noun X. Gary one day had an epiphany that he was a people person. He promptly quit his factory job and began working as a salesman. Flummox. Verb. X. Mary's behavior completely flummoxes me. I never have any idea what her motivations might be. Gaffe. Noun X. In a famous gaffe, Vice President Quayle attempted to correct the spelling of a grade school student, only to find that the child was correct. Grandiloquent. Adjective X. The dictator was known for his grandiloquent speeches, puffing his chest out and using big, important-sounding words. Hagiographic. Adjective. Excessively flattering towards someone's life or work. X. Most accounts of Tiger Woods' life were hagiographic, until, that is, his affairs made headlines. Hail. Verb. X. Many college superstar athletes are hailed as the next big thing, but then flop at the professional level. Illustrious. Adjective. X. Einstein was possibly the most illustrious scientist in recent history. Importuned. Verb. X. After weeks of importuning the star to meet for a 5-minute interview, the journalist finally got what she wanted. Impute. Verb. Attribute to something. X. He imputed his subpar performance on the test to a combination of stress and poor sleep. Insouciance. Noun X. Surprisingly, Hank had become a high-powered CEO. His high school friends remembered him as Hanky Panky, who shrugged off each failed class with insouciance. Lampoon. Verb. X. Mark Twain understood that lampooning a bad idea with humor was the most effective criticism. Litany. Noun X. Mr. Rogers spoke to a Senate committee and did not give a litany of reasons to keep funding the program, but instead appealed to the basic human decency of all present. Lugubrious. Adjective X. At the funeral, lugubrious songs filled the small church. Maunder. Verb. Max liked to maunder down by the seaside and pick up whatever seashells he would stumble upon. Maunder. Verb. Speak rapidly and incessantly. X. After drinking 2 espressos each, the animated couple would maunder loudly, annoying the other patrons in the coffee shop. Mordant. Adjective X. While Phil frequently made mordant remarks about company policy overall, he always was considerably gentler in discussing any person in particular. Moribund. Adjective X. Whether you like it or not, jazz as a genre is moribund at best, possibly already dead. Pecuniary. Adjective X. The defendant was found guilty and had to serve a period of community service as well as pay pecuniary damages to the client. Perspicacious. Adjective X. Many modern observers regard Eisenhower as perspicacious, particularly in his accurate prediction of the growth of the military. Plucky. Adjective X. Some scouts initially doubted Pedroia because of his short stature, but he is a plucky player, surprising everyone with his boundless energy and fierce determination. Portentous. Adjective X. When the captain and more than half the officers were sick on the very first night of the voyage, many of the passengers felt this was portentous, but the rest of the voyage continued without any problems. Primacy. Noun. The state of being first in importance. X. The primacy of Apple computers is not guaranteed, as seen in their recent lawsuits and weak growth. Probity. Noun. Integrity. Strong moral principles. X. The ideal politician would have the probity to lead, but reality gravely falls short of the ideal of morally upright leaders. Prognostication. Noun. X. When the senator was asked about where the negotiations would lead, he said that any guess he could make would be an unreliable prognostication. Prolixity. Noun. Boring verbosity. X. I loved my grandfather dearly, but his prolixity would put me to sleep, regardless of the topic. Provident. Adjective X. In a move that hardly could be described as provident, Bert spent his entire savings on a luxurious cruise, knowing that other bills would come due a couple months later. Punctilious. Adjective marked by precise accordance with details. X. The colonel was so punctilious about enforcing regulations that men feel compelled to polish even the soles of their shoes. Quail. Verb. X. Craig always claimed to be a fearless outdoorsman, but when the thunderstorm engulfed the valley, he quailed at the thought of leaving the safety of his cabin. Raconteur. Noun. X. Jude is entertaining, but he is no raconteur. Beyond the handful of amusing stories he has memorized, he has absolutely no spontaneous storytelling ability. Recapitulation. Noun. A summary. X. Every point of the professor's lesson was so clear that the students felt his concluding recapitulation was not necessary. Redoubtable. Adjective X. On television, basketball players don't look that tall, but when you stand in front of a 7-foot-tall NBA player, he is truly redoubtable. Sagacious. Adjective X. Steve Jobs is surely one of the most sagacious CEOs, making Apple the most recognizable and valuable companies in the world. Semblance. Noun. X. While the banker maintained a semblance of respectability in public, those who knew him well were familiar with his many crimes. Sinecure. Noun/X. The position of research director is a sinecure. The job entails almost no responsibilities, nor does the person in that position have to answer to anyone. Solecism. Noun. X. Mother Anna was always on guard against any solecism from her children and scolded them immediately if any of them talked out of place in public. Temerity. Noun. X. No child has the temerity to go in the rundown house at the end of the street and see if it is haunted. Umbrage. Noun/X. Since he was so in love with her, he took umbrage at her comments, even though she had only meant to gently tease him. Unforthcoming. Adjective. Uncooperative. Not willing to give up information. X. The teacher demanded to know who broke the window while he was out of the room, but the students understandably were unforthcoming. Vitriolic. Adjective X. While the teacher was more moderate in her criticism of the other students' papers, she was vitriolic toward Peter's paper, casting every flaw in the harshest light. Abjure. Verb formally reject or give up X. While the church believed that Galileo abjured the heliocentric theory under threat of torture, he later wrote a book clearly supporting the theory. Afford. Verb X. The summit of Mount Kilimanjaro affords a panoramic view that encompasses both Tanzania and Kenya. Aplomb. Noun X. Nancy acted with aplomb during dangerous situations. She once calmly climbed up an oak tree to save a cat. Appropriate. Verb X. The government appropriated land that was occupied by squatters, sending them scurrying for another place to live. Appropriate. Verb. The committee appropriated the funds to its various members. Autocratic. Adjective X. The last true autocratic country is certainly North Korea. Nowhere does leader exercise the absolute control over all aspects of a people the way that Kim Jong-un does. Autocratic. Adjective X. The manager was finally fired for his autocratic leadership, which often bordered on rude and offensive. Bridle. Verb /X. New curfew laws have bridled people's tendency to go out at night. Bridle. Verb X. The hostess bridled at the tactless dinner guests who insisted on eating before everybody had gotten their food. Bromide. Noun X. Instead of sharing his umbrella, the cheeky stranger offered Martha the following bromide. Looks like it's raining. Callow. Adjective X. Both Los Angeles and New York are known for callow out-of-towners hoping to make it big. Complacent. Adjective X. On her first day at the job, Annie was complacent, fulfilling every request of her new employee and anticipating future requests. Complicit. Adjective X. While the grand jury cleared the senator of all criminal charges, in the public mind he was still complicit in the corruption. Conflagration. Noun X. In the summer months, conflagrations are not uncommon in the southwest due to the heat and lack of rain. Conflate. Verb X. In her recent book, the author conflates several genres, the detective story, the teen thriller, and the vampire romance, to create a memorable read. Coterminous. Adjective X. The border of the state is coterminous with geographic limits on travel. The east and north are surrounded by a nearly uncrossable river and the south by a desert. Desiccated. Adjective X. Few novelists over 80 are able to produce anything more than desiccated works, boring shadows of former books. Desideratum. Noun X. The desideratum of the environmental group is that motorists should rely on carpooling. Discursive. Adjective Tending to depart from the main point X. Many readers find it tough to read Moby Dick since the author is discursive, often cutting the action short to spend 20 pages on the history of a whale. Dolorous. Adjective X. Chopin's ballads are filled with sharp changes in moods. A dolorous melody can give way to a light-hearted tempo. Doughty. Adjective X. I enjoy films in which a doughty group comes together to battle a force of evil. Elegiac. Adjective X. Few can listen to the elegiac opening bars of the Moonlight Sonata without feeling the urge to cry. Enormity. Noun X. The enormity of Pol Pot's regime is hard to capture in words. Within months hundreds of thousands of Cambodians lost their lives. Ethereal. Adjective X. Because she dances with an ethereal style, ballet critics have called her Madame Butterfly. Facile. Adjective X. Many news shows provide facile explanations to complex politics, so I prefer to read the in-depth reporting of the New York Times. Fecund. Adjective X. The artist had entered a fecund period, producing 3 masterpieces in the span of 2 months. Gumption. Noun. X. Wallace Stifner lamented the lack of gumption in the U.S. during the 60s, claiming that no young person knew the value of work. Auteur. Noun. X. As soon as she won the lottery, Alice began displaying the auteur to her friends, calling them dirty-clothed peasants behind their backs. Impervious. Adjective X. I am not impervious to your insults, they cause me great pain. Impugn. Verb X. Though many initially tried to impugn Darwin's theory, in scientific circles today, the is idea taken as truth. Inequity. Noun. X. After decades of racial inequity, the separate but equal doctrine was successfully overturned. Internecine. Adjective within a group or organization X. The guerrilla group, which had become so powerful as to own the state police, was finally destroyed by an internecine conflict. Inviolable. Adjective X. To many the grass at Wimbledon is inviolable and only greater tennis players are able to enjoy a game there. Malingerer. Noun. X. At one time, our country was full of hard-working, respectful people, but now it seems that everyone is a malingerer with little inclination to work. Mendicant. Noun. X. Tolstoy was an aristocrat, but he strove to understand the Christianity of the Russian peasants by wandering among them as a mendicant. Noisome. Adjective X. Each August, when the winds moved in a southeasterly direction, the garbage dump would spread noisome vapors through the small town. Obtuse. Adjective X. Jackson was the most obtuse member of the team. The manager's subtle ironies were always lost on him. Palatable. Adjective X. Mikey didn't partake much in his friends' conversations, but found their presence palatable. Panegyric. Noun. X. Dave asked Andrew to do just a simple toast, but Andrew launched into a full panegyric, enumerating a complete list of Dave's achievements and admirable qualities. Pellucid. Adjective X. The professor had a remarkable ability make even the most difficult concepts seem pellucid. Pontificate. Verb X. The vice president would often pontificate about economic theory, as if no one else in the room were qualified to speak on the topic. Prescribe. Verb X. My doctor prescribes that I not eat donuts with chocolate sauce and hamburger patties for breakfast. Proselytize. Verb X. Lisa loves her Mac but says little about it. By contrast, Jake will proselytize, interrogating anyone with an Android about why she didn't purchase an iPhone. Self-effacing. Adjective X. The most admirable teachers and respected leaders are those who are self-effacing, directing attention and praise to their students and workers. Solicitous. Adjective X. Our neighbors are constantly knocking on our door to make sure we are ok, and I don't know how to ask them to stop being so solicitous about our health. Stultify. Verb X. As an undergraduate, Mark felt stultified by classes outside his area of study. Only in grad school, in which he could focus solely on literary analysis, did he regain his scholarly edge. Transmute. Verb X. One of the goals of alchemy was to find the substance or process that would transmute lead into gold. Turgid. Adjective pompous and tedious. X the amount of GRE vocabulary he used increased with his years. By the time he was 60, his novels were so turgid that even his die-hard fans refused to read them. Tyro. Noun. X all great writers, athletes and artists were tyros at one time, unknown, clumsy and unskilled with much to learn. Unassailable. Adjective. X Professor Williams is so self-assured as to seem arrogant, presenting each and every opinion as an unassailable fact. Unimpeachable. Adjective. X after his long and unimpeachable service to the company, Sharat felt that a gold watch was a slap in the face rather than an honor. Vaunted. Adjective. X for years they had heard of New York City's vaunted skyline, and when they finally saw it, the spectacular cityscape did not disappoint them in the least. Anachronism. Noun. Something that is inappropriate for the given time period. X dressed in 15th century clothing each day. Edward was a walking anachronism. Antic. Adjective. X the clown's antic act was too extreme for the youngest children, who left the room in tears. Apathem. Noun. X Winston Churchill is famous for many apathems, but this might be his most famous. It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all the others that have been tried. Appurtenant. Adjective. X in hiking Mount Everest, Sherpas are appurtenant, helping climbers both carry gear and navigate treacherous paths. Arrogate. Verb. X arriving at the small town, the outlaw arrogated the privileges of a lord, asking the frightened citizens to provide food, drink, and entertainment. Artifice. Noun. X the mayoral candidates both spent much of the campaign accusing each other of artifices designed to mislead the voting public. Atavism. Noun. A reappearance of an earlier characteristic. Throwback. X much of the modern art movement was an atavism to a style of art found only in small villages through Africa and South America. Baleful. Adjective. X movies often use storms or rain clouds as a baleful omen of evil events that will soon befall the main character. Bemoan. Verb. X while the CFO carefully explained all the reasons for the cuts in benefits, after the meeting employees bemoaned the cuts as further evidence that management was against them. Besotted. Adjective. X even though her father did not approve, Juliet became besotted with the young Romeo. Besotted. Adjective. X never before have I seen my mom so besotted, and honestly, I hope it's the last time she drinks so much. Bristle. Verb. X as we discussed the painting, I noticed the artist's wife bristling at our criticisms, ready to defend her husband's work. Broadside. Noun. X political broadsides are usually strongest in the weeks leading up to a national election. Brook. Verb. X while she was at the chalkboard, the teacher did not brook any form of talking, even a tiny peep resulted in afternoon detention. Browbeat. Verb. X during the interrogation, the suspect was browbeaten into signing a false confession. Chagrin. Noun. X much to the timid writer's chagrin, the audience chanted his name until he came back on the stage. Chagrin. Verb. X she never cared what others said about her appearance but was chagrined by the smallest comment from her mother. Chastise. Verb. X though chastised for eating the snacks for the party, Lawrence shrugged off his mother's harsh words and continued to plow through jars of cookies and boxes of donuts. Chimera. Noun. X many believe that a world free of war is a chimera, a dream that ignores humanity's violent tendencies. Debonair. Adjective X. James Bond is known for his good looks, high-tech gadgets, and debonair manner. Deign. Verb /X. The master of the house never deigned to answer questions from the servants. Disingenuous. Adjective X. Many adults think that they can lie to children, but kids are smart and know when people are disingenuous. Doleful. Adjective X. No event is more doleful than the passing of my mother. She was a shining star in my life, and it brings me great sadness to think that she is now gone. Effervescent. Adjective X. After the sales result, the manager was in an effervescent mood, letting several employees leave work early that day. Embryonic. Adjective X. The board of directors is hoping to launch a new product soon, but planning for the Z7 is in an embryonic stages. Empiricism. None. X. Empiricism does not always lead to knowledge. An experience or experiment may raise more questions than it answers. Epigram. None/X. My favorite epigram from Mark Twain is: a man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn no other way. Ersatz. Adjective X. The car dealer's ersatz laughter was immediately followed by a price quote, one that Shelley found highly inflated. Exemplar. Noun X. Lena's homework is on the wall because it is an exemplar of clean, neat, and thoughtful work. Gambit. Noun X. Randy played a gambit, telling his boss that he would leave at the end of the week if he didn't get a raise. Hoary. Adjective X. Most workout gurus are young, fit people, whereas most yoga gurus are hoary men with long white beards. Inanity. Noun X. Bill's poem was nothing more than a list of impressive-sounding words, so there was no point in trying to take meaning from the inanity. Ingenuity. Adjective X. Ingenuity. Ideas about the relation of humans to other animals had been discussed since the Middle Ages, but the modern theory really began with Darwin. Ineffable. Adjective X. While art critics can occasionally pinpoint a work's greatness, much of why a piece captures our imaginations is completely ineffable. Languish. Verb X. Stranded in the wilderness for 4 days, the hiker languished, eating protein bars and nuts. Meteoric. Adjective X. The early spectacular successes propelled the pitcher to meteoric stardom, but a terribly injury tragically cut short his career. Nettlesome. Adjective X. Maria found her co-worker's cell phone nettlesome because every few minutes it would buzz to life with another text message. Objurgate. Verb X. The manager spent an hour objurgating the employee in the hopes that he would not make these mistakes again. Paragon. None/X. Even with the rise of Kobe Bryant, many still believe that Michael Jordan is the paragon for basketball players. Paragon. None/X. Some say that Athens was the paragon of democracy, but these people often forget that slaves and women were still not allowed to vote. Percipient. Adjective X. Even the most percipient editor will make an occasional error when proofreading. Philistine. Adjective X. Jane considered Al completely Philistine because he talked almost exclusive about video games. She was entirely unaware of how well-read he really was. Phlegmatic. Adjective X. Arnold is truly noble, remaining reserved until an issue of significance arises, but Walter is simply phlegmatic. He doesn't have the energy or inclination to care about anything. Pith. Noun X. When Cynthia hears a speaker presenting a complex argument, she is always able to discard the irrelevant details and extract the pith of what the speaker is trying to convey. Rapprochement. Noun X. Although Anne hoped that her mother and her aunt would have a rapprochement, each one's bitter accusations against the other made any reconciliation unlikely. Recrutus. Verb X. After years of Gamblers Anonymous, Tony thought he'd broken his compulsive slot machine playing, but it took only one trip to the Atlantic City for a full recrudescence. He lost $5K on the one-armed bandit. Reprisal. Noun X. The Old Testament doctrine of an eye for an eye is not the kind of retaliation practiced in war. Rather, an arm, a leg, and both ears are the reprisal for the smallest scratch. Solicitude. Noun X. I walked to his house in the rain to make sure he had enough to eat while he was sick, but he seemed not to appreciate my solicitude. Squelch. Verb X. After the dictator consolidated his power, he took steps to squelch all criticism, often arresting any journalist who said anything that could be interpreted as negative about his regime. Truculence. Noun X. When the boss confronted Aaron about his earlier remarks, Aaron responded with utter truculence, simply throwing a glass of water in the boss' face and walking away. Unprepossessing. Adjective X. World leaders coming to meet Gandhi would expect a towering sage and often would be surprised by the unprepossessing little man dressed only in a loincloth and shawl. Unstinting. Adjective X. Helen is unstinting with her time, often spending hours at the house of a sick friend. Untrammeled. Adjective X. The whole notion of living untrammeled inspired the American Revolution and was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Vitriol. Noun X. His vitriol spewed forth from a deep-seated racism that consumed his whole life. Asperity. Noun X. The editor was known for his asperity, often sending severe letters of rejection to amateur writers. Celerity. Noun X. We aim to respond to customers' questions with celerity and accuracy, with no longer than a 24-hour wait time. Corollary. Noun X. A corollary of Hurricane Sandy, which ravaged the east coast of the U.S., is a push to build higher seawalls to protect against future hurricanes. Cosseted. Verb X. The king and queen cosseted the young prince, giving him a prized miniature pony for his 5th birthday. Crestfallen. Adjective X. I asked Maria on a date and she refused without a moment's thought. I was crestfallen. Crystallize. Verb Cause to take on a definite and clear shape X. Only after 15 minutes of brainstorming did Samantha's ideas for the essay crystallize. Decry. Verb X. The entire audience erupted in shouts and curses, decrying the penalty card issued by the referee. Denouement. Noun X. At the denouement of the movie, all questions were answered and the true identity of the robber was revealed. Dispensation. Noun X. Since her father is a billionaire, she is given dispensation from many of the school's policies. Dovetail. Verb X. Although Darwin's evolution and Mendel's genetics were developed in isolation from one another, they dovetail very well. Encumber. Verb X. The costume encumbered all my movements and caused me to sweat profusely. Equitable. Adjective X. The equitable distribution of ice cream to a group of 5-year-olds will ensure little to no fighting, at least until the ice cream is gone. Firebrand. Noun. Freddy is a firebrand. Every time he walks into the office, he winds up at the center of heated argument. Flippant. Adjective. Although Sam was trying to honor Mark's sense of humor, many found it quite flippant that he wore a comic nose and glasses mask to Mark's funeral. Hobble. Verb. Bad weather has hobbled rescue efforts, making it difficult for crews to find bodies in the wreckage. Hubris. Noun. Bill Clinton was criticized for his hubris since he believed he could get away with anything once in the White House. Immure. Verb. The modern supermarket experience makes many feel claustrophobic as they are immured in walls upon walls of products. Imperious. Adjective. Children are imperious with each other before they learn that earning someone's respect is better than demanding. Impetuous. Adjective. Herbert is rarely impetuous, but on the spur of the moment, he spent thousands of dollars on a motorcycle today. Improvident. Adjective. Marty was improvident, never putting money aside for the future but spending it on decorating the interior of his home. Incontrovertible. Adjective. Unless you can provide incontrovertible evidence, I will remain skeptical. Inimitable. Adjective. Mozart's music follows a clear pattern that anyone could imitate, but his music gives an overall sense of effortlessness that is inimitable. Intimation. Noun. At first the hostess tried intimation, praising the benefits of cutlery. When Cecil continued eating with his hands, the hostess told him to use a fork at dinner. Inure. Verb. 3 years of Manhattan living has inured her to the sound of wailing sirens. She could probably sleep through the apocalypse. Invidious. Adjective. At a time when many others in the office were about to be laid off, many considered Cheryl's fine clothes that day an invidious display. Inviolate. Adjective. While the literary critic subjected most of the classics to the harshest reviews, he regarded Cervantes as inviolate and had nothing but praise for him. Irrefutable. Adjective. The existence of life on Earth is irrefutable. The existence of intelligent life on Earth is still hotly debated. Lacerate. Verb. The teacher was fired for lacerating a student who wrote a poor essay. Machinate. Verb. The rebels met at night in an abandoned barn to machinate. Magisterial. Adjective. Though she was only a third-grade teacher, Ms. Martinet was magisterial in dealing with her class, lording over them like a queen. Nonchalant. Adjective. The 20-somethings at the coffee shop always irked Sheldon, especially the way in which they acted nonchalantly towards everything, not even caring when Sheldon once spilled his mocha on them. Obstreperous. Adjective. When the teacher asked the obstreperous student simply to bus his tray, the student threw the entire tray on the floor, shouted an epithet, and walked out. Ossify. Verb. Make rigid and set into a conventional pattern. Even as a young man, Bob had some bias against poor people, but during his years in social services, his bad opinions ossified into unshiftable views. Patent. Adjective X. Since the book had been through no fewer than 6 proof runs, the staff was shocked to see such a patent spelling mistake remaining right in the middle of the front cover. Peripatetic. Adjective X. Jim always preferred a peripatetic approach to discovering a city. He felt that he could see so many more details while walking. Presentiment. Noun. A feeling of evil to come. X. On the night that Lincoln would be fatally shot, his wife had a presentiment about going to Ford's Theatre, but Lincoln persuaded her that everything would be fine. Puerile. Adjective X. Helen enjoyed blowing soap bubbles, but Jim regarded this as puerile, totally unworthy of a woman with a PhD. Puissant. Adjective X. Over the years of service, and quite to his surprise, he became a puissant advisor to the community. Rarefied. Verb /X. Jack's vulgar jokes were not so successful in the rarefied environment of college professors. Recrimination. Noun X. The two brothers sat and cried, pointing fingers and making elaborate recriminations of the other's guilt. Ribald. Adjective X. The speaker was famous for his ribald humor, but the high school principal asked him to keep the talk G-rated when he spoke to the student body. Spartan. Adjective X. After losing everything in a fire, Tim decided to live in Spartan conditions, sleeping on the floor and owning as little furniture as possible. Stalwart. Adjective X. Despite all the criticism directed at the president during this scandal, Lisa has remained his stalwart supporter. Subterfuge. Noun X. Finally deciding to abandon all subterfuge, Arthur revealed to Cindy everything about his secret affair over the past 2 years. Surreptitious. Adjective X. Since his mom was a light sleeper, Timmy had to tiptoe surreptitiously through the entire house, careful to not make the floors creak, until he at last was able to enjoy his plunder, a box of chocolate chip cookies. Tempestuous. Adjective X. Chuck and Kathy had always been stable and agreeable people on their own, but when they got involved, it was a tempestuous relationship. Unflappable. Adjective X. The house shook and the ground quaked, but my dad was unflappable and comforted the family. Unpropitious. Adjective With little chance of success. X. With only a bottle of water and a sandwich, the hikers faced an unpropitious task, ascending a huge mountain that took most 2 days to climb. Untenable. Adjective Incapable of being defended or justified. X. With the combination of Kepler's brilliant theories and Galileo's telescopic observations, the old geocentric theory became untenable to most of the educated people in Europe. Unviable. Adjective Not viable, not able to work, survive, or succeed. X. The plan was obviously unviable considering that it led to complete environmental destruction in the river valley. Abrogate. Verb Revoke. Formally X. As part of the agreement between the labor union and the company, the workers abrogated their right to strike for 4 years in exchange for better health insurance. Adjudicate. Verb X. Only those with the most refined palates were able to adjudicate during the Barbec competition. Adjudicate. Verb X. Only those with the most refined palates were able to adjudicate during the Barbec competition. Bastardization. Noun X. The movie World War Z is a complete bastardization of the book with little more in common than zombies and a title. Bereft. Adjective unhappy in love, suffering from unrequited love. X after 64 years of marriage, William was bereft after the death of his wife. Bereft. Adjective sorrowful through loss or deprivation. X you are not bereft if you haven't played on your Xbox in the past week, his mother said. Canard. None/X the public will always be fooled by the media's canards. Capitulate. Noun to surrender. X Paul, losing 19-0 in a ping-pong match against his nimble friend, basically capitulated when he played the last 2 points with his eyes closed. Cataclysm. Noun. X the introduction of smallpox was a cataclysm for Native Americans, killing off more than half of their population. Chauvinism. None. X vegetarians argue that man is chauvinistic in his belief that animals do not consciously feel the pain we humans do. Concomitant. Adjective. X concomitant with his desire for nature was a desire for the culture and energy of a big city. Countermand. Verb. X by the time the colonel countermanded his soldiers not to land in enemy territory, a few helicopters had already touched down amid heavy gunfire. Demonstrative. Adjective. X when Sally told James that she wanted to break up with him, she expected he would react demonstratively, but he quietly nodded his head and left without saying a word. Despot. None. X the Emperor Claudius was regarded as a fair-minded leader. His successor, Nero, was an absolute despot. Diminutive. None. X he prefers to be called a diminutive of his name, Bill, instead of John William. Diminutive. Adjective. X when he put on his father's suit and shoes, his appearance was that of a diminutive youth. Dissemble. Verb. X to get close to the senator, the assassin dissembled his intentions, convincing many people that he was a reporter for a well-known newspaper. Dissipate. Verb. X the recent graduates dissipated their earnings on trips to Las Vegas and cruises in Mexico. Dissipate. Verb. X Kathleen's perfume was overwhelming in the cramped apartment, but once we stepped outside the smell dissipated and we could breathe once again. Dissolution. Noun a living full of debauchery and indulgence in sensual pleasure. X many Roman emperors were known for their dissolution, indulging in unspeakable desires of the flesh. Ebullient. Adjective. X can you blame him for his ebullient mood, he just graduated from medical school. Enamor. Verb. X she is completely enamored with Justin Bieber and goes to all his concerts on the East Coast. Eponym. None the name derived from a person for whom something is named. X Alexandria, Egypt is an eponym because it is named after Alexander the Great. Estimable. Adjective. X after serving 30 years, in which he selflessly served the community, Judge Happer was one of the more estimable people in town. Evanescent. Adjective. X the storm flashed into existence above us and lasted only a short time, an evanescent turbulence of wind and cloud. Exiguity. Noun. X after 2 months at sea, the exiguity of the ship's supplies forced them to search for fresh water and food. Exorbitant. Adjective. X Shelley made one exorbitant purchase after another, buying new clothes and taking vacations even though she earned a limited salary. Extrapolate. Verb. X by extrapolating from the data on the past 3 months, we can predict a 5% increase in traffic to our website. Flag. Verb X. After the 3 crushing defeats in the last 3 games, the team's enthusiasm began to flag. Graft. Noun X. In countries with rampant graft, getting a driver's license can require no more than paying an official. Halcyon. Adjective X. The first decade after WWI was a halcyon period in America with newfound wealth and rapidly improving technology. Hoodwink. Verb X. Someone tried to hoodwink Marty with an email telling him that his uncle had just passed away and to collect the inheritance he should send his credit card information. Ineluctable. Adjective X. For those who smoke cigarettes for years, a major health crisis brought on by smoking is ineluctable. Infelicitous. Adjective X. During the executive meeting, the marketing director continued to make infelicitous comments about the CEO's gambling habit. Lachrymose. Adjective X. Lachrymose and depressed, Alexei Alexandrovich walked 2 miles home in the rain after learning that his wife was having an affair. Loath. Adjective Unwillingness to do something contrary to your custom X. I was loath to leave the concert before my favorite band finished playing. Misattribute. Verb to erroneously attribute, to falsely ascribe, used especially of authorship. X. I made a mistake. I misattributed Crime and Punishment to Leo Tolstoy when it was actually written by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Modicum. Noun X. If my sister had even a modicum of sense, she wouldn't be engaged to that barbarian. Oblique. Adjective X. Herbert never explicitly revealed anything negative about Tom's past, but at times he would obliquely suggest that Tom was not as innocent as he seemed. Obtain. Adjective X. The custom of waiting your turn in line does not obtain in some countries, in which many people try to rush to front of the line at the same time. Officious. Adjective X. The professor had trouble concentrating on her new theorem because her officious secretary would barge in frequently reminding her of some trivial detail involving departmental paperwork. Palaver. Verb speak rapidly and incessantly X. During the rain delay, many who had come to see the game palavered, probably hoping that idle chatter would make the time go by faster. This word has other definitions, but this is the most important one to study. Panacea. Noun X. While the company credit card has made most large purchases easier, it is no panacea. Some smaller basic transactions still must be conducted in cash. Pillory. Verb X. After the candidate confessed, the press of the opposing party took the opportunity to pillory him, printing editorials with the most blatantly exaggerated accusations. Promulgate. Verb X. The president wanted to promulgate the success of the treaty negotiations, but he had to wait until Congress formally approved the agreement. Raillery. Noun X. The new recruit was not bothered by the raillery, finding most of it light-hearted and good-natured. Row. Noun X. The Prime Minister looked very foolish after his row with the foreign dignitary was caught on video and posted on YouTube. Sardonic. Adjective X. A stand-up comedian walks a fine line when making jokes about members of the audience. Such fun and joking can quickly become sardonic and cutting. Simulacrum. Noun a representation of a person X. The Shanghai Urban Planning Exhibition Center showcases a simulacrum of all the present and approved buildings in the city of Shanghai. Simulacrum. Noun X. The early days of computer graphics made real people into a simulacrum that now seems comical. Splenetic. Adjective X. Ever since the car accident, Frank has been unable to walk without a cane, and so he has become splenetic and unpleasant to be around. Surfeit. None. X. There was no such thing as a surfeit of shopping for Nancy. She could stay at the outlet stores from opening to closing time. Trenchant. Verisimilitude. None. X. All bad novels are bad for numerous reasons. All good novels are good for their verisimilitude of reality, placing the readers in a world that resembles the one they know. Veritable. Adjective X. Frank is a veritable lifesaver. Last year, on 2 different occasions, he revived people using CPR.